I want to remind everybody in the audience to turn off your phones. I'd like to call to order the Tuesday, September 6, 2022 Board of Supervisors meeting. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Christie.
Here.
Supervisor Grijalva. Here. Supervisor Hines. Supervisor Scott.
Here.
Chair Bronson.
Here.
Let the record show Supervisor Hines is out, Supervisor Christie is participating remotely, and all other board members are present.
Please rise now for the Pledge of Allegiance to be offered today by Supervisor Grijalva.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yo le doy mi altar a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América, la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos.
Thank you, Supervisor. And now we'll go to the land acknowledgement statement. We have a video of Christina Andres providing it. Thank you for joining us, Christina.
Hi, my name's Christina Andrews, and it's a privilege and honor to be here and to be asked to read the federal land acknowledgement. I am Hiacharotam, which is a tribe out here. It's actually in the Ajo area, still in Pima County. I'm a member of the Tohono Nation, and that's on my mother's side. And on my father's side, I am Pascuayaki, coming from the lineage of Gastelum. So with that, I wanted to say I currently am working with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, so I pretty much oversee the court systems of tribes and also of states, and I try to create relationships and trust between the state and the tribes and improve the court systems of both. With that, I'm going to go ahead and read the federal land acknowledgement. Pima County acknowledges that this is the land and territories of Indigenous peoples and acknowledges the 22 federally recognized Indigenous tribes of the state of Arizona, with Pima County being home to the Tohono and Pascuayaki. In partnership with Native nations, Pima County acknowledges the traditional ancestral territory on which we live and work today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Chair Bronson. For the record, Supervisor Hines is present.
Thank you. All right, now we move on to pause for pause.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaylee Murdoch. I am the Public Information Officer here at Pima Animal Care Center, and I'm coming to you today for Pause with my friend Bubbles. Bubbles is about 3 years old, and he came into the shelter in May, so he's actually been here for months waiting for his new home. Bubbles came in as a stray, so we don't know too much about his history, but what we do know is that here at the shelter, he's been a super cool, fun, social dog who gets along with everybody. He's really just a nice guy. The volunteers love him, and we are hoping to find him his home soon. Like I said, he's been waiting a while, so we'd love to find him his place. So right now at PAC, we have about 480 adoptable dogs and around 100 cats. We did our Clear the Shelters promo in August, which went really well, and we saw plenty of awesome adoptions, including some long-stay dogs go home, which is really amazing to see. But of course, we still have plenty of animals who are looking for their homes. We also are always looking for fosters, but we're especially looking for safety net fosters at the moment. Our safety net program takes care of owned animals while their owners are in some crisis, whether that might be eviction, hospitalization, any number of things. PAC is open every weekday from 12 to 7 and every weekend day from 10 to 5. Be sure to come down if you're interested in adopting, fostering, or even just seeing some of the amazing stuff that our staff and volunteers are doing for the animals here in Pima County. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And he looks like, Bubbles looks pretty energetic. All right, we have some changes to the agenda. On page 9, item 35, P22RZ00001, Tucson School District Number 1, South Cardinal Avenue rezoning. The applicant is requesting this item be continued until the Board of Supervisors meeting of October 18th. On page 11, item 39, Development Services Hearing Fee Ordinance Revision. This is a correction to the ordinance number. It should read ordinance number 2022-21. And then on the consent calendar, page 14, item 4, Community and Workforce Development, Our Family Services, Inc., Amendment Number 1. Staff is requesting that this item be continued until the board meeting of September 20th, 2022. If there are no objections, the agenda will be so amended. You don't have a...
Madam Chair?
It's only the board that can object. Sorry. All right. Supervisor Christie, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to make a note here. Could we take a look at the audio on the system here? I'm having a bit of a hard time hearing the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Can our IT guru this? Thank you. All right. We now will move on to presentations and proclamations. Item 5, presentation of a proclamation to Christina Bickelman, Executive Director, and Shelley Jernigan, Communication and Events Director, National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, proclaiming the month of September 2022 to be Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. If there are no objections, motion carries. I think Supervisor or Scott, are you going to present? And then Christina, I understand you also have a short presentation. Okay, staff, do we have the video? Let's do the presentation. Oh, there, we got the video. All right, let's, oh, there's music, thank you.
Once in a lifetime, there's a certain someone who always knows the right thing to say. They make you happy, they raise your spirits, and never asking for more than the same. You know they'd be there with a helping hand, never knowing that you're their biggest fan. And there are angels, and there are people, but sometimes I have trouble telling them apart. You're not near impression that you made on me helps so much. And there are angels, and there are people, but sometimes I have trouble telling them apart. You're not near, but you're not far. And even though I know you're not here, you're not gone. I spend most of my time thinking and looking up at the sky, wondering how could he take you, and asking him why. And there are angels, and there are people, but sometimes I have trouble telling them apart. You're not near, but you're not far. And even though I know you're not here, you're not gone. Even though I know you're not here, you're not gone.
That was very nice. Thank you so much, Supervisor Scott.
Good morning. I'm going to read the proclamation. Whereas the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Southern Arizona works to support people with mental illness and their loved ones, and 46% of people who die by suicide had a diagnosed mental illness. And whereas suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, resulting in 45,000 deaths per year, and is the second leading cause of death for people ages 10 to 34. And whereas the overall suicide rate in the United States has increased 30% from 2000 to 2021, from 10.4 to 13.5 suicides per 100,000 people. And whereas in Pima County there has been a 72% increase in suicides among minors age 12 to 17, and a 61% increase among adults ages 50 to 59. And whereas the benefits of recognizing the warning signs and overcoming mental health challenges, substance abuse overdoses, suicide attempts, and loss are significant. And whereas Suicide Prevention Awareness Month is a time to draw attention to this stigmatized and often taboo topic. And whereas, in addition to shifting public perceptions, we will use this month to spread hope and vital information to people affected by suicide. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Pima County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims the month of September 2022 to be Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and encourages county residents to stand together for mental health, increase understanding of mental illness, and access mental health resources to reduce the occurrence of suicide in our community. And I just wanted to add really quickly, the last job that I had before I retired as an educator was as a middle school principal, and in my last year in the position, we had presenters from the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Southern Arizona come in and talk to all of our 7th and 8th graders in their science classes. NAMI is an outstanding organization, and I would certainly encourage anybody in the area to take advantage of the many resources that it offers. Congratulations. Did you want to say a few words?
I do just want to say that we are here for you, and one of our biggest programs that he was talking about is the Ending the Silence program for middle and high school kids, and it does talk about the warning signs It tells kids to reach out to an adult. It also gives them the warning signs of suicide so that they might recognize how they're feeling or someone they know is feeling. And we have also all sorts of programs for adults as well. So what we'd like to have is fewer of those names on videos and more here with us.
Can you mention the text message program that supports the Ending the Silence?
So there is also a program that was developed at the University of Arizona that's called Text Talk Act, and we try to get grant funds for that program to accompany our Ending the Silence program, and it gets the kids who often don't want to talk texting each other, and sometimes that's the best way to get to the younger kids. They're more apt to express themselves on text than they are actually talking. So it's a really good backup to our Ending the Silence program, and it's run by Raquel Goodrich, so she's a consultant.
Thank you. And he's going to work with you.
Thank you. Our next item, item 6, is a presentation of a proclamation to Matt McClone, Community Outreach Coordinator, Pima County Office of Emergency Management, a number of other people, and Courtney Slaniker, the Executive Director, Southern Arizona Chapter Red Cross, proclaiming the month September 2022 to be Preparedness Month. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. If there are no objections, motion carries. Supervisor Hines will make the presentation.
Thank you. Whereas September has been designated as National Preparedness Month to encourage all Americans to be prepared for emergencies in their communities, and whereas National Preparedness Month incorporates a nationwide coordinated effort sponsored by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to inspire and remind citizens to plan and prepare for natural disasters or other emergencies in their homes, schools, businesses, and communities, and whereas emergency preparedness is the responsibility of every resident of Pima County, and everyone should make it a priority to learn about risk factors and protect themselves against possible injuries, property damage, and economic losses that often result from disasters. And whereas during the month of September, the Pima County Office of Emergency Management, along with community organizations active in disasters, COAD, the faith-based community, our public safety partners, and other local, tribal, private, and volunteer agencies will engage in activities to educate the public about the importance of being prepared. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Pima County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims the month of September 2022 to be Preparedness Month, and shares that the theme of National Preparedness Month 2022 is A Lasting Legacy. The life you've built is worth protecting. Prepare for disasters to create a lasting legacy for you and your family. The board encourages all county residents to take proactive steps to plan for any situation, including signing up for myalerts.pima.gov and confirming insurance policies cover hazards such as intense storms, flooding, wildfires. Additionally, it is recommended people learn CPR, first aid, and other life-saving skills and take useful safety steps like shutting off utilities. Promote family and community disaster planning now and throughout the year. It is crucial to prepare in advance to ensure Pima County is resilient and disaster ready. Passed and adopted the 6th day of September 2022.
Thank you.
Of course.
Would you like to say anything?
Please.
Yes, ma'am. The Pima County Office of Emergency Management wants to extend its thanks to the board and to the commitment to safety, as well as all of the partners that were listed. It's a big part of making our community safe and telling all of us that being prepared isn't an accident. We need to take those steps to make sure we're safe.
You guys are doing a great job. Thank you. All right, the next item on the agenda is a presentation of a proclamation to Lee Clausen, and if I mispronounced your name, my apologies, Program Manager for Tobacco and Chronic Disease Prevention, Pima County Health Department, and Rebecca McKee, Vice President, Population Health Initiatives, Pima County Council on Aging, co-chairs Southern Arizona Chapter of the Arizona Falls Prevention Coalition, proclaiming the month of September 2022 to be Falls Prevention Awareness Month. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Supervisor Grijalva is going to try to not fall as she makes the presentation.
Is it on? Yeah, okay. Good morning. I did not fall, although the irony of me being in this boot on Falls Prevention Month. Okay. Whereas slips and falls impact everyone in Arizona. Come, welcome. Thank you for holding that. I'll start again. Whereas slips and falls impact everyone in Arizona, resulting in injuries and financial tolls for residents, especially those 65 or older, and the healthcare system. And whereas slips and falls are the leading cause of injury-related deaths among 65 and older. And whereas Gila County ranks first, Pima County ranks second, Santa Cruz County third, and Cochise County seventh in the rate of Arizona hospitalizations due to age-adjusted unintentional falls. And whereas the total cost of unintentional falls, even excluding those for physician care, EMS services, rehabilitation, or long-term disability, exceeds $3 billion a year. Whereas falls can lead to depression, loss of mobility, loss of functional independence, and whereas older Arizonans need fall prevention programs that can teach them specific everyday strategies to improve mobility and stability and reduce fall risks. Now therefore be it resolved that the Pima County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims the month of September 2022 to be Falls Prevention Awareness Month and urges older adults, family members, caregivers, healthcare providers, regional medical centers, fire personnel, first responders, law enforcement officers, and community partners to join the Southern Chapter of the Arizona Falls Prevention Coalition and routinely assess older adults, including veterans and those with disabilities, for fall risk strategies that improve mobility and stability to reduce falls. Passed and adopted the 6th day of September 2022. Thank you, and thank you for being here. Did you want to say something?
Sure. Do you want me to take the other end of that?
That would be wonderful. Stability is the key. Okay. I would like to say thank you, Supervisor Grijalva and members of the board. We really appreciate the opportunity to share the space with you today for this very important topic and work that we're doing in our community. We couldn't do it without all the partnerships that we have. I will say that ground level falls continue to remain the #1 cause of injury and death for adults 65 and older in Pima County and across the state, national statistic. Now I'll hand it to Rebecca.
We appreciate this opportunity, and while we've made great inroads, we still have a lot of work to do, so partnerships like this and support are really the key for success moving forward in increasing education and raising awareness, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to, I think we're now on to the addendum agenda presentation proclamation of a proclamation to Richard Noel and Director and Jam T. Grow, LLC, and Robert Burton, retired administrator, City of Tucson Parks and Recreation Department, proclaiming the day of Saturday, September 17th, 2022, to be International Peace Day in Pima County. I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. If there are no objection, motion carries. Supervisor Hines will make the presentation. And before you begin, Supervisor Christie, the audio issue, according to our IT department, is on your end. You probably need to turn up the volume on your computer. That's what I've been told.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, so whereas the International Day of Peace, or Peace Day, was established in 1981 by the United Nations and has focused on many issues related to peace over the years, including human rights, disarmament, peace and democracy, youth and education, sustainable development, fighting climate change, and more. And whereas every year, on or near the 21st of September, communities around the world commemorate International Peace Day with celebrations, volunteering, educational activities, and other ways to come together with our neighbors and recommit to peace and dignity for all. And whereas here in Tucson, community organizers have put together the 3rd annual Drum Up for Peace on the evening of Saturday, September 17th at Silver Lake Park on South Keno Parkway, just north of the Quincy Douglas Center, which will bring together our diverse Pima County community for a free, family-friendly event to commemorate International Peace Day. And whereas everyone is encouraged to participate in Drum Up for Peace, which will include food vendors, dance troupes, poetry readings, inspirational speakers, singing, dancing, drumming, and more. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Pima County Board of Supervisors hereby proclaims Saturday, September 17th, 2022 to be International Peace Day in Pima County, and urges all members of our community to recommit and on that day and the days that follow in our homes, neighborhoods, schools, businesses, and places of worship to peace and dignity for all, passed and adopted the 6th day of September 2022.
I'd like to take this time to thank the Chair of the Supervisors, Sharon Bronson, and the rest of the supervisors for allowing us to participate and have this event. It is is to celebrate National Day of Peace, which is actually the 21st of September, but we're going to celebrate it here in Tucson on the 17th. And I just want to thank all the board members, especially Dr. Hines and Supervisor Grijalva, for allowing us to have this event. We're expecting about 200 to 250 people to be out there, and I would like to invite everybody to please come to this event. It's something like you've never seen before. And with that in mind, I'm co-organizer. Richard Noel is the real organizer, and I'm going to pass the mic to him.
And tell me, as you're making your comments, how did it get to be September 21st? What's the history there?
Could you repeat that?
How did International Peace Day land on September 21st? Is there a history there?
Yes, there's a history, but good question. I'll have to research it, my lady.
I do know in 1981 it was declared National Day of Peace by Congress, and I can't remember the people that declared it, but it's been in operation since 1981, and it's declared National Day of Peace, where everybody was supposed to lay down arms and just spend that whole day, 24 hours of peace. And so we adopted it here in Tucson, and if I tell you any much more than that, you won't come out to see it, so I'm going to encourage you to come out to see it.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to share with you all that this is the collective objective is for us to really come together. It really moved me when the organization that presented earlier on suicide prevention and all what is happening. There's a lot of people that don't know that there's help when they lose their peace. And the acronym for peace is pursue excellence and cherish everyone. So I just don't want this to be another day of just, all right, this is being September National Day of Peace. I want to bring all entities together to let the public know that there is help when you lose your peace. And we are not really providing entertainment, we are providing edutainment. So every artist that is on stage will have a message that peace begins with you. So I believe that peace begins right now, and we're going to to do just 1 minute. This is not America Got Talent, but I want you all to join me. So we're going to do a simple song. The song goes, we are all one. We are not alone. Together we are strong. Let's start today. All right? Are you ready? Yeah. So repeat after me. Go. We are all one. We are all one. We are not alone. We are not alone. Together we are strong. Together we are strong. Let's start today. Let's start today. We are all one. We are all one. We are not alone. We are not alone. Together we are strong. Together we are strong. Let's start today. Let's start today. Let's start with love. Start with love. Let's start with joy. Start with joy. Let's start with peace. Let's start today. Start today. Let's start with love. Start with love. Let's start with joy. Start with joy. Let's start with peace. Start with peace. Let's start today. Hey, hey, oh, 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 hey, hey, oh, oh, hey, hey, oh, oh, thank you.
September 21st, 1945, the United Nations in San Francisco declared the end of World War II.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
And also, I left something out. We would not be up here if it wasn't for Councilmember Richard Fenders. He's been supportive of our presentations and everything we do out there forever. So I just want to give a special shout out to Councilmember Richard Fenders.
Oh, I want to see those drums. Wow. Oh, that's quite. I'm jealous. All right, we're moving on. We're done with the presentations. We're moving on to call to the public. As a reminder, individuals wishing to participate telephonically must contact the clerk's office by the deadline date listed on the agenda. Each speaker will need to complete a speaker card and will be limited to no more than 3 minutes, and they must adhere to the rules of civility, refrain from impertinent, slanderous remarks. When they are called upon to speak, step forward to the podium, state your name for the record, and direct comments to the board. Speakers who do not abide by these guidelines will have their comments interrupted and may be removed from the board meeting. All right, with that, we start with Drew Heaton.
Aloha kako, Madam Chair and members of the board. As you know, my name is Drew Heaton. I'm the daughter of Eugene Franklin Rowe and Jane Kia Nuenue Okalani Awa, which makes me the blessed descendant of two, one sovereign and independent nations, the United States of America and the Hawaiian Kingdom. As the chairman for the Libertarian Party of Pima County and my frequent statements before you, I suspect that you may surmise my position on a number of items on the agenda. So I will dispense with those comments in favor of a culture and history lesson. Most people, even Hawaiians, because they have been robbed of their language and culture, don't know what aloha means. It's used in greeting or in parting, so it's mistakenly interpreted as hello, goodbye, or even I love you. Alo is face. It's my face. Ha is breath. When Hawaiians meet and greet each other, they press their forehead and nose together and pause as they exchange breath, acknowledging the life each gives to each other. It's a religious practice as much as a cultural practice. and one I've continued even over these last 2.5 years. Likewise, many have come to know the word haole, most people say, as stranger, foreigner, even white person. But again, that's inaccurate, because they don't recognize that Hawaiian is as much of a nationality. There were Chinese Hawaiians, there were white Hawaiians, Native Hawaiians. When Hawaiians saw those who would come to their islands, and they named them haole, it's because ha means breath, and aole means no. In other words, when they witnessed them pray and speak, they acknowledged that they spoke without breath, without spirit. So as those, and also as a member of the Libertarian Party First Nations Caucus, I come before you and I ask, much like our Queen, that you follow the rule of law. To this day, as acknowledged by President Clinton, the Hawaiian Kingdom is illegally occupied, and it desires for its sovereignty. It doesn't need it, it already has it to be acknowledged and accepted. Our Queen simply asked that the rule of law be acknowledged by the United States. So I'm asking you with aloha to be leaders of our country and our nation here and our community with breath. Aloha.
We have one individual joining us telephonically, Dr. Joanne DiFilippo. Is she on?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, Chair Bronson and Supervisors. My name is Dr. Joanne DeFilippo. I'm a Pima County taxpayer in District 3. Today I'd like to provide brief comments on several agenda items. The first is Agenda 17, Vacation and Sick, which is actually combined with Agenda 29, I believe, but I'm only going to address Agenda 17. I hope you had a chance to review my comment letter. However, if not, please take the time to read my comments. While I support the county advocating for being a quote-unquote employer of choice, it is simply not the time to approve Agenda Item 17, which is the increase of 3 additional vacation days for all employees. I ask that you complete the ongoing compensation study before you vote on this action. The compensation study results will in all likelihood create a substantial financial impact for taxpayers. Your desire to create competitive benefits packages is admirable, but many taxpayers who will be required to fund this initiative simply don't have the funds to pay their own bills and keep abreast of today's challenging economic times. However, if you want to be an employer of choice, here's a simple suggestion which will not cost taxpayers additional funds and which will serve the local workforce, that is, those looking for jobs, while benefiting the county hiring practices. And namely, that is to take a look at the county's hiring requirements. I'm going to give you an example. The entry-level trades and maintenance positions currently require 2 years' work experience. Reduce the overburdening work experience requirements to less than 2 years, and I can guarantee your hiring pool of candidates will increase substantially. Departments are willing to train workers for these entry-level positions, and at the same time, employment can be offered to local individuals desirous of attaining gainful employment. Remember, what you approve today will increase the financial obligations of taxpayers today and in the future. The second that I want to address is Addendum 2, which is brought forward by Supervisor Christie, the COVID-19 employee mandates. The City of Tucson recently faced a civil lawsuit brought forth by the state of Arizona for unlawful employment practices, engaging in a pattern of discrimination against employees, and practices of retaliation. Based on your board's actions regarding COVID-19 vaccination mandates, which are very similar and or like to the actions of the City of Tucson, do you honestly think your actions will be exempt from not facing a similar fate as that being presented now to the City of Tucson? Think before you act. If not, Hopefully, the voters will take the appropriate action in November 2024. Thank you, Chair Bronson and Supervisors.
Thank you, Dr. Filippo. All right, our next speaker is Chris King. And again, state your name for the record.
Give me 1 second, I gotta pull up my statement here. That wasn't me. Good morning, Chair and Supervisors. I'm Chris King, Republican designee to the Election Integrity Commission, speaking on behalf of the Pima County Republican Party. I want to thank you for recognizing that September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. In the memo from the county administrator recently, it was stated that only 2 of the election integrity commissioners spoke during the last EIC meeting. This was either an oversight or intentionally false. The comments and questions presented to the commission by both Republican and Libertarian commissioners were not included in the memo from the administrator. Numerous questions and observations were presented to the commission, and a follow-up report is forthcoming to the elections director. One of the more troubling comments presented to the elections director during the EIC meeting was that at least one vote center did not have communication with the election center for approximately 12 hours. Additionally, during a random search of the elections canvas, certified by this board on 15 August, I witnessed a vote cast for a Republican candidate in a precinct that contains 0 voters. How is this possible? This makes me question the results of the canvas and the election. A full report of from the Pima County Republican Party will be presented to the elections director prior to the next Election Integrity Commission meeting. Lastly, as a personal comment, September 17th is National Prisoner of War Missing in Action Day and United States Constitution Day. Thank you, Board.
Thank you. We haven't seen you in a while. Welcome back.
Thank you, Chair.
Robert Boyce.
Table is wet. I'm going to finish my Jeffersonian principal comments that I've been covering this summer. I don't think I can get this whole paragraph into one presentation, so I'll finish at the next meeting. About to enter, fellow citizens, on the exercise of duties which comprehend everything dear and valuable to me. This is our first liberationist president at the hour of his inauguration. Everything dear and valuable to me, it's proper that you should understand what I deem to be the essential principles of our government, and consequently those which ought to govern its administration. Peace, equal and exact justice for all, I'm dotting out one 3-letter word, of whatever state or persuasion, religious or political, peace, commerce, and honest friendship with all nations, entangling alliances with none. Support of the state governments as the surest administrators of our domestic affairs and the most competent, the surest bulwark against anti-Republican sentiments. Support of the general government in its whole constitutional vigor as the sheet anchor of our peace at home and safety abroad. We need to get this next part right. Safety abroad. A jealous care of the right of election by the people, a mild and safe corrective of abuses which are lopped by the sword of the revolution, where peaceable remedies are unprovided. I'm going to cut to the chase. These principles form the bright constellation that has come before us and have guided our path through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and the blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of civil instruction, the touchstone by which we try the services of those we trust, and if we should wander from them in moments of error or alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety. I will finish at the next meeting and give my personal comments of what I've covered this summer. And thank you.
Thank you. Peter Norquist. Peter Norquist. That was a tough one.
Thank you. All right, good morning, members of the board and Administrator Lesher. I trust that you all had a good Memorial Day weekend. Labor Day. Excuse me, and thank you for the correction. So today, what I'd like to speak about is regarding the current COVID-19 vaccination mandates for Pima County employees to be discussed as number 2 on the addendum, which is to include but not be limited to an explanation of hiring, promotion, and raise eligibility policies and insurance penalties assessed to unvaccinated employees from the county administrator and human resource department and their legal representatives. To begin with today, I'd actually like to share a few personal anecdotes about people who I believe have been affected by the COVID shots. About a year ago, the first person that I knew personally was a friend of mine, one of my oldest friends in Tucson. He was diagnosed with transverse myelitis and had to stay in the hospital during the time during which it was recommended that he receive 2 shots, which he did. He was beginning to recover, but within a few days of receiving the second shot, this began to reverse. Unfortunately, a week later, he was found dead in his wheelchair by his children, who came over, one of whom was a nurse in training, who tried to resuscitate him, but with no success. The second person is a friend of mine who was apparently healthy until receiving his shots that he was required to take to maintain his job. After this, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma. He asked his doctors if this could be related to the shots. Some were honest and they actually told him maybe. They're not trained to even look for this as a cause. Finally, a family member of mine was also apparently healthy until receiving her shots and boosters, after which she was diagnosed with 2 liposarcomas, a fairly rare form of cancer which occurs in the fatty tissue. Her case was stonewalled for over 2 months while she waited for experts in 3 states to reply to her, and finally, when they moved on her case, she was told that they would be removing parts of her pancreas, spleen, liver, and 1 kidney. Some of the doctors also want to remove her gallbladder. So how many people do I know who received all of their shots and were still diagnosed with COVID anyway? Many. And many more than those I know who never received the shots in the first place. So I'm almost out of time, but I want to make the point that this clearly shows that COVID inoculation is not a winning strategy. The shots do not prevent the recurrence of the epidemic, nor hospitalizations, nor severe forms, nor death. This should be more than enough reason to prevent carrot and stick approaches which aim to force county employees into acting against their own health and self-interest. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ann Rose. Ann Rose.
We love the stories.
Good morning. My name is Ann Rose Tishoff. If you haven't picked up this book by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's a real page turner, and half of its references about our Dr. Fauci. How war games became instruments for imposing obedience. Dark Winter, Atlantic Storm, and Global Mercury were only 3 of over a dozen germ games staged by military, medical, and intelligence planners leading up to COVID-19. Each of these Kafkaesque exercises became uncanny predictors of a dystopian age that pandemic planners dubbed the new normal. The consistent feature is an affinity among their simulation designers for militarizing medicine and introducing centralized autocratic governance. Each rehearsal ends with the same grim punchline: the global pandemic is an excuse to justify the imposition of tyranny and coerced vaccination. The repetition of these exercises suggests that they serve as a kind of rehearsal or training drill for an underlying agenda to coordinate the global dismantlement of democratic governance. Today, the United States FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, defines medication health fraud as offering unproven and untested products to the public. And in truly Orwellian fashion, they're doing it again. Recently approving Pfizer's mRNA COVID bivalent booster for BA4, BA5 subvariants via emergency use authorization without clinical trials on humans. The booster was tested on 8 mice. Pfizer analyzed their blood for antibodies. What did the data show? The 8 mice, identical and reacting identically at producing the Wuhan variant antibodies, reacted wildly different when producing antibody responses against the BA5 variant. One little mouse had an immune response of 300 antibodies. One mouse had 22,000 antibodies. But all 8 mice became infected with COVID when challenged with the BA5 variant virus after receiving this booster. Pfizer's not sharing the data, whether the mouse who got 73 times greater immune reaction felt sicker, or whether the mouse who got 73 times lower immune response had no protection from the variant. So the experiment on the American people continued, and here in Pima County, by the way. It's blood money that the county has taken from the federal government.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Van Gelden. Lisa? And again, state your name for the record.
Oops. Good morning, Chair Bronson. I'm wearing my cute shoes again, and I want to demonstrate for all of you proper reading. I invited all of you, when I was last here, to come to one of our free constitutional classes. It's a series of classes that will educate you on our Constitution. Sir, I love what you're doing with Jefferson. I'm going to read a little something, too, from Jefferson. Hang on, here we go. Where were you? I know no safe depository of the ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power. And while I want to say that my nature is to believe you all never intend to abuse your constitutional authority, it happens over and over and over again in this country, at the federal level and at the local level. And this is why I'm asking you to take a class on the Constitution. One of the things that has been found is by observing the constitutional votes of our elected leaders, we can find out what they are causing us, the pain they're causing us in our wallets. And at the beginning of the year, our government had created federal debt that equals $238,534 per taxpayer. This one legislator whose record I have here in English and Spanish has added another $23,479 to the debt of the citizens of Pima County and of the entire country. And I'd like to come before and hand you a copy of this record.
Hand them to the clerk and then she'll distribute.
And they're in English and Spanish.
Okay. And then maybe one for the clerk as well, so she can post.
Jefferson was right. The Constitution is the solution. And anybody who wants to learn about the proper role of government and their constitutional rights, please ask me. I would love to help educate you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Tim Law. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Ross? Locks? Locks? As in you lock a door? Goldilocks, got it. Normally in French, which this looks like it's a French name, you don't pronounce that X? That's interesting.
It's not going to go there today.
Okay.
My name is Tim Locks. I am a retired database administrator. I worked for Computer Sciences Corporation and IBM out at Raytheon, now known as United Technologies. Before I get into anything database, I just wanted to mention that I was a poll worker. My time at the training was absolutely useless. Useless, and I say that because we were given 2 manuals. It was hard to follow the instructor. People were flipping around trying to find out where he was at. They didn't bring out any hardware until after the training was done, and at that point, I had to leave because of my schedule for that day. We would have been far better served to have been trained on using the hardware and going through actual polling experience rather than looking at a couple of manuals, which I did take home and read. So that's all I'll say about that.
And I'm going to give you a little extra time, but I would love to have you memorialize that in some sort of memo to us.
Sure, be happy to. Okay, the second thing was just at the polling locations, the password for what they call the cradle, which is actually a router. It's not a cradle. It might be, the proper term might be point cradle, which is okay? So it's actually a router that is able to communicate with the cloud. Does anyone here, any of the supervisors, happen to know what the password was for that? I mean, it was a really high-end password. Capital VOTE 123. It was written on it was on several pieces of paper. Everything.
It was written on everything.
Anyone could have been outside any polling location and hacked into the system. Okay, that's all I'm going to say about Election Day and that. As far as the database side of things, I am absolutely, adamantly opposed to having all of this election data up on the cloud. As a database, as a DBA, there are just way too many security issues with regard to putting things up on the cloud. I don't care who is providing the service. I think you would be far better served to spending the $90,000 proposed in that contract to hire people to count paper votes. The more technology you guys are throwing at things, the worse you are making it for voters, for voter suppression, frankly. That's my opinion, okay? And I just think that getting back to paper ballots the way things used to be is a far better avenue to go down than trying to throw more technology which just opens up more holes for people to hack into and create havoc for our election system. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our last speaker is Shelley Carr.
Madam Chair, Supervisors, the Recorder's Office has two distinct and yet separate functions: recording documents and voter registration, and they are the trustee of the official Pima County voter roll. Their top priority is to ensure security and integrity of voter records and for the residents of Pima County. The voter registration, the database management of the registration records, and the maintenance of the voter database is an inherently governmental function and a core function of the Pima County Recorder's Office. Inherently governmental means that it must be done by government employees. If we put the constitutional test to it, we see that we apply constitutionality to conducting elections. The voter database is a requirement to conduct elections. It is part of the process. Secondly, the security and the integrity of voter records for the residents of Pima County. You are proposing to outsource the security and integrity of the voter records and the PII of your constituents and the 630,000 voters in Pima County to a private residence. While this is not a question of the competence of the individual, 2 years prior to his retirement from Pima County, he established a business. This has been in play for quite some time. Managing the voter records from a private residence in Pima County is not acceptable. Additionally, the third piece of this contract is the cost. If you look at the cost and you maximize the dollars, it comes out to $71,136. You're awarding a contract for $90,000. Now, you're also comparing this in a cost comparison with one FTE. One FTE, you are currently recruiting for an IT manager at $80,000 to $90,000. What you are contracting for is a .30 FTE at $90,000. I would suggest that you need to consider three questions in this contract. Should this function be contracted out because it is inherently governmental? 2, can you ensure the security and integrity of your constituents' personally identifiable information? Not when you have it on a cloud, not when it is being managed from a personal residence. And 3, is this the most cost-effective solution? I will tell you, in my years of business, it is not. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our call to the public. Thank you all who are here for Call to the Public for joining us today. We now move back to our regular agenda. Board of Supervisors sitting as other boards. We're now Flood Control District Board. There's items 9 through 12. Does anybody wish to divide the question? If not, I'll move those items.
I'll second.
Motion and a second for items 9 through 12. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. We now move on to the consent calendar as amended. Does any board member wish to divide the question?
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Christie.
I didn't quite hear a couple of the changes and amendments to the consent calendar.
The only change was item 4, and that was a request to continue until 9/20/22.
Okay, so I would like respectfully to pull items 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12, and 29.
8, 9,
10,
10,
and 29.
12, and 29. All right, I'll move the remainder of
2, 3.
consent.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing none. Motion carries. All right, moving on to item number 2, which is Community and Compass Affordable Housing, Inc. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
did anyone else pull these, or was I the only one that pulled these?
You were the only one, I believe you were the only one that's pulled items. And it looks
so
like
if-
items 2 and 3 are kind of related.
Yeah, they all kind of are, and that's why I'm hoping we can maybe take, for the sake of time, to kind of include them all together, 2, 3, 4, and 5. But this has to do with emergency rental assistance, continuum of care, housing and urban development, continuum of care program, Tucson prep schools, La Casita, continuum of care. These all are grants to help in the overall process of evictions. And I just have a couple of questions that I hope I can get some answers. Are we still on overload status from the city of Tucson since they terminated their eviction activities and placed them back with Pima County? Are we still on overload with them?
Dr. Garcia.
Dr. Garcia?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I'm not sure what you mean by overload status.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I mean, you can answer his question, but since he wants to consider 2, 3, and 5, no, again, 4, Supervisor Christie was continued until 9/20/22. I'm going to withdraw my original motion, and I will now move items 2, 3, and 5.
I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second. Dr. Garcia.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, consent agenda item number 2, that one does relate to the emergency rental assistance program. I think what you were asking was whether we are continuing to conduct this program. Yes, indeed, we are, and I believe the city continues to wind down its pieces of it. Items 4 and...
Just to restate my question for clarity purposes, Dr. Garcia, basically, are all these amendments and contracts helping process the backlog? Where are we? Are we caught up?
Supervisor Christie, Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, no, the only amendment that is about the the eviction rental assistance program is consent agenda item 2. The other ones do not have anything to do with eviction rental assistance.
And how is item 2, what's the status of that as far as the backlog, and are we caught?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, we have been making a tremendous amount of progress getting through the backlog. I believe that as of last week, we are down to approximately 500 or so pending applications. There was a fair amount of duplication in the applications that appeared to be backlog, and so we, especially now with our additional partners like Compass Affordable Housing, have been able to process a bunch of these applications and are moving them expeditiously through the process.
Madam Chair, Dr. Garcia, do you have any idea or any indication how many cases are still pending?
Sir, Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, because we are continuously getting applications, there are always cases that are pending.
Why don't we just get a report? I want to see those numbers as well.
That would be helpful. Other than that, that answers my questions on 2, 3, and 5.
Any further discussion on those items? Any objections?
I object.
One objection. Any further objections? Motion carries 4-1. Moving on to item 8, Bosse-Roman amendment. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Yes, I'm going to vote for this Sheriff's Department issue, but one question that stands out that I feel compelled to ask is, what is the County Administrator's Fund?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, it is the budget that was in the County Administrator's office.
And for what amount is the total budget?
I do not know that. I'm happy to get that back to you.
Okay.
And how is this County Administrator's Fund funded? Where does it get its funding?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, you approve it each year in the annual budget allocation.
I guess my question is, why is this coming from the County Administrator's Fund and not from the sheriff? Since it's related to a row officer, why is this coming directly from the County Administrator?
Chair Bronson, this is amendment number 6. It's been this way for a while. I'm happy to look into that and find out the history of it and get that to you all.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if we could get a definition of the County Administrator's Fund, when was it started, what is its purpose, how is it funded, and why does it exist? I'd appreciate that too.
All right, if there are no further discussion, I'll call the question. Any objections?
Chair Bronson, since we don't have the information, can this item be brought back to our next meeting? Or are you comfortable moving forward?
Yeah, I think moving forward at this point, but we do need the information, but if you'd like to have it continued, we can.
It's just because we don't have a lot of, I mean, there were a couple questions about when this started, why it's coming out of this fund, and I just think it's worth bringing back.
Okay, I'll withdraw my motion. Let's continue this till our next meeting and get those answers. If there are no objections, we'll continue it. Moving on to Grants Management and Innovation, item 9. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Catholic Community Services of Southern Arizona to provide for emergency food and shelter to families and individuals encountered by the Department of Homeland Security and extend the contract and amend the language and scope of services. It also states in the background that the services, Catholic Community Services will be feeding and providing food at overflow hotels. Am I correct in stating that those overflow hotels are the Red Roof Inn, the Comfort Inn Suites, the Lux Hotel, the ones that we'll be dealing with on number 12? Are those the overflow hotels that Catholic Community Services will be providing food for?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, yes.
So there's, as we go to 12, we'll see that there seems to be a duplication of effort here between two different agencies involved with feeding these folks. So where is the demarcation line of who's responsible for what and who's getting paid for what?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, as you just indicated, you ran through the list of the hotels that we are providing the additional services through Catholic Community Services for the legal asylum seekers. 12 is other, those services are provided for our eviction prevention program. So they are separate services, both providing food to people who live in hotels, but for different populations. happy to provide you a report and an update that summarizes the amount of food for each of the separate programs.
I'd appreciate that. And the other question I have is in the background, is that this is a retroactive request, and that the funding covers eligible expenses incurred July 1 through 2022 through December 31, 2022. So we're paying for some months ago. And it states here, agreement negotiations have been ongoing since May. If there's an agreement, what is there to negotiate? What does that mean?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, they have been negotiating the agreement.
Yeah, so we still don't know if it's going to be this amount of money, or are they going to come back and change that or request more? How can we approve something if there is no finalization of an agreement?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, that's what's before you today, is the finalization of that agreement. It is retroactive because of the discussions that have occurred that brought us to a final document before you today.
I see. So the agreement has been achieved in the past, and now you're bringing this before the board.
For approval, yes, sir.
For approval. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's all I have.
Is there any further discussion? Thank you. We want to make sure we have a quorum. If there's no further discussion, are there any objections? Hearing none, one objection, Supervisor Christie. Supervisor Hines isn't here. Motion carries 3-1. I need to do a little housekeeping on item 8. I asked that we continue this. We need a formal motion for continuance in a second. I will move to continue.
I'll second, just to our next board meeting.
In next board meeting, correct.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
since we're asking for additional information, would it also be appropriate that the item not be placed on the consent agenda at our next meeting?
Yes, that would be appropriate.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, all continued items are placed on the regular agenda.
All right, there's a motion and a second to continue. If there are no objections, motion carries 4-0. Moving on to, what are we on now? Item 10. Helping ourselves pursue enrichment. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to pull this one for the opportunity to vote no.
All right, if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. Objections? One objection from Supervisor Christie. Any further objections? Motion carries 3-1. Item number 12, it's an amendment of a master agreement, Rural Dining LLC. I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an amendment of award to Rural Dining to provide for food service county congregate and non-congregate shelters. This amendment adds one additional contractor, and this is a secondary provider, and it states at no cost. How can we be adding another vendor, another provider, at no cost? That's my first question.
Ms. Lasher?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, the amount of money that will be spent to purchase food and provide food has not increased. It will just now be distributed amongst one more provider.
And the shelters, the Red Roof Inn, the Comfort Suites, the Comfort Inn and Suites, the Grand Lux Hotel, the Hyatt Place Tucson, Casita Maria. These are all shelters that will be provided food by Rural Dining and the new vendor.
And all the vendors. Dr. Garcia.
Dr. Garcia?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, these are
And
all...
speak a little bit into the microphone.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie.
Thank you.
These are all potential sites of the delivery of that service. It does not mean that that service is necessarily being delivered at each and every one of those sites. So this contract adds an additional vendor, and the contract also sort of articulates all the possible places where that service may be performed. So this does not mean that all those sites are being serviced simultaneously or that they are all being used at their maximum capacity.
Madam Chair, Dr. Garcia, so if we go back to item 9, is there any overflow, or I should say blending of food providing and additional monies that we've just given to the Catholic Community Services, and now we have World Dining, and now another food provider vendor? Are all of these distinct and separate, or are we just funneling all this money into these folks, and however the food needs to be provided, they'll do it?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, there is absolutely no duplication. The previous agenda item with regards to Catholic Community Services, as you very correctly pointed out, was for a time period certain from July 1st, 2022 to December 31st, 2022. What is proposed in the consent agenda item number 12 is prospectively delivered services. So no, there is not a overlap.
So my next question is, are any of these other hotels that I just listed or shelters, are they under contract to provide food?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I do not actually believe that the hotels themselves are under contract to deliver that. In previous iterations, a long time ago when we first started this, there might have been one or two, but I do not believe so.
Can we get a memo to that effect, and can we memorialize it? This is very confusing.
Absolutely.
It is, and while we're memorializing it and getting a memo to that effect, if maybe a closer look at the mathematics involved as far as how much money is being granted and how much money has been spent already, and it seems that there's a balance of almost $900,000 from the original grants, and now that $900,000 is being utilized in some place. It seems very convoluted and very confusing, and I appreciate the chair's request to have a breakdown and an analysis on this. This is a lot of money, and a lot of vendors, and a lot of hotels, and a lot of food, and I'm not getting a sense that people are really clear on who's receiving the food and who's receiving the payment and what their respective missions are. So if we could get that analysis, I'd be very...
Chair Bronson, there is clarity, and we're happy to provide that memo. Thank you.
All right. All right, if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. Any objections?
I object.
Supervisor Christie objects. Hearing no further objections, motion carries 3-1. Again, Supervisor Hines is not with us. And moving on to item 29, acceptance, grants, management, and innovation, City of Tucson, Summer Youth Program, $300,000. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Yes, Madam Chair. Item 29 is to provide for the Summer Youth Program for the City of Tucson. Just a question is, this is being paid now, but the program began back in June, I believe. And the mission was to provide 58 accepted applicants with internship roles with the City of Tucson. Did we get 58 accepted applicant interns?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I'll ask Dr. Garcia for a little clarity, but let me indicate again. This is $300,000 that we are receiving from the City of Tucson to pay for the individuals that were in the program within the City of Tucson. So we are accepting these funds in lieu of as payment for the services provided. Dr. Garcia?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie. So this is indeed reimbursing the county for those 58 interns that were placed using our summer program infrastructure. Those trainees were part of our workforce, and they were paid, and they performed well, and this is simply making the county whole.
Okay, so to answer my question, we did receive, or the city received, and were able to contract 58 summer youth interns.
We placed with the city 58 interns. They were our employees. They were county employees.
For which the city is reimbursing us. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair Bronson.
And $300,000 divided by 58 interns is the amount of the grant, as well as the amount of the interns.
Payment to the interns, yeah.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, that includes salary, ERE, and some training expenses. Correct.
Okay.
All right.
That's all I have, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All right, have we exhausted our discussion? Can I call the question?
Please, that'd be great.
All right. I'm going to call the question. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries 4-0. All right, we've been at this for an hour and a half. We're going to take about a 10-minute break.
Okay.
And we'll return at the sound of the gavel. If we get everybody to take their seats, we're going to resume our regular board meeting. And we now are on Board of Supervisors, regular agenda item 14, Juan Cruz Memorial Overpass and Resolution 2022-56. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, any objections? Hearing none, motion carries 4-0. Moving on to item 15, Elections Division After Action Report. Supervisor, you put this on the agenda, Supervisor Scott?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, thank you very much. And the reason I put this on the agenda for this meeting is, well, there's several reasons. First of all, this meeting is closer to the completion of the August primary. I also think that waiting until October, right before early ballots are sent out for the board to discuss this, is not what we should be doing. And I further think that there is always great importance in reassuring the public about the safety and security of our election systems. I'm still very interested in any recommendations that we may get from the Election Integrity Commission when they take up this matter in their September meeting, but we are the accountable ones as a matter of statute. I'm also very much motivated by some recent headlines, the dismissal of an absolutely frivolous lawsuit that was bought by Mark Fincham and Carrie Lake against Maricopa and Pima counties dealing with the use of our electronic tabulation equipment. And I'm very much inspired, Madam Chair, by the example of our colleagues on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. As we know, this board is a 4-1 Democratic board. The Maricopa County Board of Supervisors is a 4-1 Republican board. And all 5 of those gentlemen have stood up to fight the big lie that the 2020 election was somehow stolen from Donald Trump, and to stand up for the integrity of their systems and the dedicated service of their employees and volunteers. And I think we should use their model as emblematic of how we should act and behave. So I was grateful to Ms. Hargrove and Ms. Lesher and everybody within county administration for the 7-page after-action report that we have. And although it is a preliminary report, the larger points are unlikely to change. The bottom line is that our first run with e-poll books and vote centers was a success, which is a credit to our employees and our volunteers. And I just wanted to share, because I don't know if the people here in attendance or if the public watching has had an opportunity to look at the document that's attached to this agenda item. So I just wanted to share some excerpts from it. The e-poll books and ballot-on-demand printers performed well and with minimal disruptions in the majority of the 129 vote centers, with most locations experiencing only a few quickly remedied issues. Evaluations are still being conducted. The county hired over 1,700 temporary aides and workers for the primary election. They all performed well and admirably in a new system and with new equipment. Poll workers commented that they found the new system to be an improvement from 2020 and that e-poll books allowed for a faster and smoother process. Many added that the e-poll books were simple and easy to use and worked very well. There were few complaints about the new vote center locations from voters, and accessibility to vote centers did not appear to be an issue. While there were some issues with the new technology, the problems were easily resolved in most cases. Typically, these issues were temporary and could be fixed simply by logging off and back onto the e-poll books, entering the correct login information, or resetting printer connections. The most common observation from poll workers regarding the e-poll books was that they needed more of them or expected to need more of them for the general election, which is great feedback. We strive for close to perfect, error-free outcomes, but recognize it is not always possible. Some areas of concern were identified that need improvement relating to equipment, human error, logistics, and supplies. Most of the delays experienced on Election Day resulted from a printing and supply chain issue. One of the problems encountered early on Election Day was the lack of provisional ballot envelopes at some vote centers. Additionally, one vote center, Kirk Bear Canyon Library, ran out of ballot stock in the middle of the day. The center had to close for 2 hours. During the election and after, election staff heard that some vote centers could not connect the e-poll books to the printer, or the printer would not print a ballot. It was found that the folding tables bowed under the weight of the printers, and that adjusting to a flat surface allowed them to work properly. The problem was resolved quickly after adjusting the printers. Other printer issues required taking them offline to troubleshoot the problem or replacing the affected printer. Issues relating to e-poll books were mostly due to user error. However, the equipment and system are being reviewed. Better training and support will be provided prior to the general election. Election staff observed some confusion from poll workers and voters on the different types of ballots issued. Sample ballots mailed to voters were in the same format as the actual ballots. Sample ballots sent to vote centers, however, did not mirror the actual ballot format. Voters registered on the early voting list and issued an early ballot that choose to instead vote at a vote center on Election Day must vote a provisional ballot to ensure that a duplicate has not been cast. By the way, that issue is going to be addressed again later in the report. Elections received about 19,000 early ballots that were dropped off at vote centers for the 2022 primary election. And this next sentence deals with a question that we had at the last meeting about provisional ballots. Additionally, of the 4,127 provisional ballots cast on Election Day, 90% of those were due to registered voters who did not vote their early ballot and instead cast their vote in person at a vote center. And I will point out that there's been significant trashing of early ballots and the process for counting them by several people who are running for state office, including Mr. Fincham and Ms. Lake, whose lawsuit was dismissed, as I have previously mentioned. Recently passed legislation, however, regarding early ballots will impact provisional ballot numbers, as early voters will now be allowed to surrender their early ballot at a voting location and cast a regular ballot instead of a provisional ballot. This will reduce the number of provisional ballots cast on Election Day. On election night, 10 vote centers were brought to Ms. Hargrove's attention regarding discrepancies with counts at particular vote centers. It should be noted that, as with every election, there are minor procedural discrepancies at polling places by poll workers. Vote centers are no different from precincts, and these are not unusual. One commissioner stated at the last EIC meeting that she was there on election night until the end, along with Ms. Hargrove, and observed that every time the computer count differed from the count on the report, every one of them was investigated. What is important to note is that none of this led to any votes not being counted. The Elections Department is using this assessment to reinforce procedural training for poll workers and vote center inspectors to make improvements and revisions as necessary to minimize discrepancies in the general election. Madam Chair, I also wanted to review some of the items that were brought to the attention of the board back in the spring when we voted to implement vote centers, becoming the 12th of 15 counties to do that, and when we became the last of the 15 counties to implement e-poll books. Some of those concerns were that having fewer vote centers than precincts would inconvenience voters, that there would be longer wait times, long lines. There were concerns about the connectivity of e-poll books. There were significant concerns raised about security and the risk of hacking of the e-poll books. There was concerns raised about fewer long-time staff in Elections Division and the Recorder's Office. There were some concerns, and Ms. Hargrove herself said this concerned her, but it didn't happen, that we would have insufficient amount of equipment, both e-poll books and ballot-on-demand printers, but that was not an issue. And then we heard in front of this board and also in phone calls and emails to our offices that vote centers and e-poll books were part of a scheme to make stealing elections easier. And again, those were mostly heard by people who have been proponents of the big lie that the 2020 presidential election was stolen. The preliminary report and the voter experience in August shows that none of these concerns were realized. We also were encouraged at the last meeting to go through the collated emails and phone messages that were put together by the District 4 office. They were sent to all of the offices. What I did is I went through the list, and if somebody wrote about more than one concern, I made sure that all their concerns were noted. But this is what I found. 12 of the concerns that were sent to us were about the use of felt tip pens or markers. Now, I wasn't on the board in 2020, but I know that that issue was addressed not only in this county, but Maricopa County and other counties. It is a non-issue in terms of the safe tabulation of our ballots. There were 6 references to training of poll workers. There were 5 references, once again restating opposition to e-poll books and vote centers. There were 4 references to provisional ballots and how they were and how they were handled. There were 3 references to ballot collection boxes at the vote centers. 3 references to logistical issues at vote centers, 3 to sample ballots, 2 about the ability to drop off mail-in ballots at vote centers, 2 people complaining that they were given a federal ballot, and the definition of a federal ballot is in the memorandum, 2 references to envelopes that the mail-in ballots arrived in, 2 references, and this came from a married couple, who asked to be removed from the automatic early voter list and found that they were removed from the voter rolls entirely. And then 1 reference to each one of the following. A voter who complained about how her driver's license was shown to multiple poll workers. A question about whether or not the United States Postal Service is engaged in ballot harvesting. Somebody who received the wrong voter ID card. Somebody who raised questions about the competence of the recorder and the elections director, 1 reference to the previously noted Bear Canyon Vote Center, 1 reference to whether or not we should have a vote center at the fairgrounds, 1 reference to the legality of ballot harvesting, 1 reference to whether there was an equal number of partisan workers at each vote center, 1 concern about the location of the early voting locations that are run by the recorder's office, 1 question about the mock election that was done by, the 2 mock elections that were done by the elections division, and then 1 person who wants to be a poll worker. Many of the concerns that were in the collated items sent to us from the District 4 office were unrelated to vote centers and e-poll books. There was little indication of any patterns on Election Day. So, Madam Chair, let me close by saying this. As the old adage goes, facts are stubborn things, and we ought to be a board that honors the facts. We can see from this preliminary report that the facts speak to a mostly successful first run with e-poll books and vote centers. The facts also dictate for us what we need to do better so that the voter experience in November is even more positive than the one they had in August. There's a lot of disinformation being spread around about our election systems in Pima County and throughout the United States. All of that disinformation can ultimately be traced back to the schemes of a former president who refuses to accept the fact that he lost the 2020 presidential election. What is truly sad is that the people who bear the brunt of the misplaced anger fomented by Donald Trump and those who either believe him or enable him are the people who work in our elections, both our employees and our volunteers. That fact ought to be wholly unacceptable to this board. Our elections are safe and secure. E-poll books and vote centers have also made voting in our county more accessible and more convenient. We should defend these facts and stand by the people who run our elections. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And did you want to make a motion, or I'm not sure why?
No, ma'am. That was just on there, as you can see, for discussion or action. I just wanted to review the after-action report that was sent to the board August 31st. And also the items that were sent to us by the District 4 office, as well as make some comments related to both.
Chair Bronson?
Supervisor.
We do have a report that was requested for October, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So we're basically information only, so let's move on to the next item.
Madam Chair?
Just a moment. I just want to clarify, Supervisor Grijalva, you have to leave by 1:30 today, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Supervisor Christie.
Yeah, the only thing missing from Supervisor Scott's report were rainbows and unicorns. And I'm being chastised, people are being chastised for questioning a voting system that has never been implemented in Pima County by two new officials who have never run a full-blown election in Pima County. And we dare have any questions or criticisms of the process or concerns? Let me remind my colleagues, this is the most sacred element of our society, and that is our right to vote. And it is in everybody's interest to make sure that everything is discussed, everything is brought out in front, and everything is addressed. And that's merely the whole process of this and the after-action report. Supervisor Scott has done a wonderful job of defending the elections department, but he left out a part of the whole movement for the after-action report, and that was the recorder's after-action report. There is no such indication in either Ms. Lesher's or Supervisor Scott's presentation about the recorder's after-action report. And I find that this was brought in a most inappropriate manner and a most inappropriate time, particularly when even the county administrator says the preliminary information provided above is by no means all-inclusive. The final after-action report is being prepared and will be available by the allotted timeframes. We have not reached those allotted timeframes, and the reports are to go to the Elections Integrity Commission first for their input and review, and to have it brought at this level, at this time, is certainly premature, and it gives my colleague an opportunity to grandstand about how the great big lie is permeating into Pima County, and the Hobbs-Fincham situation is tentacalizing into everybody's brains. And I must say, President Trump still lives in a number of my friends on the board's brains. And this has nothing to do with any of that. This is about a new system being installed, being put together in Pima County that has never been done before. And as I move on, I received a letter from a member of the Elections Integrity Commission, and his comments are, while it's pretty regarding the county administrator's memo, which Supervisor Scott just presented, while it's pretty much the whitewash about the, quote, learning experience I would expect, I must admit I was taken aback by County Administrator Lesher's comments on page 2 about the commissioners who spoke. And this is quoting the County Administrator in her August 31st memorandum entitled Preliminary Information, and I quote, two EIC commissioners provided feedback at their last meeting. One stated that the Democratic Party had observers at both recorders and elections offices, and that all of them reported back that they were very impressed with the process The other commissioner commented that she worked 16 hours at a vote center in Oro Valley that serviced over 1,000 voters on election day. The commissioner goes on to say, I don't know how much of the EIC meeting people were able to watch, but another commissioner and I were stunned at the blatant failure to mention the participation and contributions of the 2 Republican commissioners and 1 libertarian. And those 2 is who Jan Lesher refers to, are both Democrats. I know that I, as a commissioner, spoke longer and covered more issues than any other commissioner, and my fellow commissioner and I together easily had the floor longer than the rest of the commission combined. There's no mention of their comments in Ms. Lesher's memorandum, and they go on to say that the county administrator owes us an apology and should revise her memo. My next question is, and I don't see Director Hargrove's report. I don't see any reference to that. But has the issue of politically imbalanced vote center staffing been addressed? And if so, how? Out of 129 vote centers, 45 were unbalanced. 6 had no Republicans and 2 had no Democrats. You may make no mention in your presentation on that. This item centers only on the elections division. What is the status of the recorder's office, quote, after action report? We don't hear anything about that today. That's not on the agenda item. There's no mention of that, and that's just as essential as the elections. Recorders came, and I have to remind everybody that the recorder's office came before the Board of Supervisors to advocate for voting centers and ask for money to implement the system. Where is her report? Where is Ms. Hargrove's report? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They're not due till next month. And to have this discussion now is superfluous, it's grandstanding. You get to take a swipe at Trump and lawsuits and elections that people have questions over, and it does nothing to further advance people's confidence in the system, because as the Elections Integrity Commissioner points out, it was a whitewash. So that's why I want to know, why was this item placed today? Why wasn't the process respected that we passed at the last meeting for it to go to the September 16th Elections Integrity Commission first and then on to the Board of Supervisors? This was an attempt to circumvent the system to defend the recorder, except the recorder didn't get included in this presentation, which she should have if you're going to do it right. And then on top of that, the issue has been noted that this is inconclusive. So, Madam Chair, those are my comments, and I think we've had both sides, and I hope we can move on from here.
No, Madam Chair, if I may.
Keep your voice down.
No, I'm not going to keep my voice down when I'm being accused of grandstanding by a colleague who monopolized this topic at the last meeting to further his own ends. And Supervisor Christie, you're very fond of taking up a significant amount of time during our meetings to advance your own causes and your own opinions, and then when somebody else has the temerity to put something on the agenda, which is the right of every supervisor, and I've never challenged your right to do that, sir, you refer to it as grandstanding. Well, I think if anybody goes back and looks at the last meeting and sees how much time you spent on these emails and phone messages that came into your office that were supposedly so substantive, and how you are willing to carry the water of members of your party who are voicing their opinions on the Election Integrity Commission, if anybody's grandstanding in this space, Supervisor Christie, it's you. And you've been doing that on this issue since its inception, and you're continuing it today. And I'm sure you'll continue it in October. I'm not going to wait to follow your timeline, which you set at the last meeting, to defend our election systems and the people who work our elections. That was your timeline. And I said at the beginning of my remarks that I would honor any recommendations that were made to us by the Election Integrity Commission, but I'm not going to wait till October to talk about this issue, is because that's what you want. And as far as chastising anybody, the only people who I chastised were President Trump, who I believe is worthy of that, and the candidates for Secretary of State and Governor who mounted a frivolous lawsuit against this county and Maricopa County, and your colleagues who share your party affiliation on the Maricopa County Board recognize that that lawsuit was frivolous. But, you know, I can't help that you do not. And as far as the Recorder's Office not being part of this after-action report, the Elections Division is accountable to the board. The Recorder's Office is run by an independently elected official. The other thing I will say is that we can have discussions about these issues and have different opinions on these issues without characterizing the motivations or the actions of each person. So I'll take back what I said about you grandstanding. I'd certainly appreciate it if you'd do the same for me.
All right,
Madam Chair, I can play the last word game. It seems Supervisor Scott wants to get every word last. So I'm not going to let this last word end with his. If he recalls, the entire board voted unanimously for this time frame. I didn't set any time frame. I put it before the board, and they agreed to it. You jumped the gun on this, and I don't know why, other than for political purposes, and to take swipes that have nothing to do with this whole process. As far as grandstanding, I can go back to numerous occasions, just like you say you can, about you and other members who have grandstanded. That's all part and parcel of the process. I don't have any problems taking criticism. Matter of fact, that's also part of the process of this board. So if you want to jump the gun, make sure you do it inclusively and include the recorder's report, who handles the early voting situations and is in charge of the imbalance of those voting centers. There are some items here that need to be addressed, need to be discussed, and I don't think that your position is doing anything to advance that cause. So I look forward to the final report of the recorder, which is part of that time frame that the board approved, as well as the elections director. And I thank you, Madam Chair. I had the last word.
Madam Chair, can I ask a question? Can I ask a question, please?
One question, and then we're moving on.
Okay, you know, I think you're a little bit more willing to shut me down than you have been to shut down our colleague from District 4, but that's okay. My question is for Ms. Lesher. Ms. Lesher, other than the items that were in this preliminary action report, what items can we expect that weren't covered in this report? This was a pretty extensive report. What items are yet to be covered that are going to be given to the Election Integrity Commission and then to the board?
All right,
Chair
gentlemen.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, in addition to information from the recorder, I'm looking through the election director's notes here. How much else will be included in the final report?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott. So the connectivity, any technical issues that were allegedly occurred, we're looking into that, so we have to bring that back to you. And additional information from vote centers, still pulling together information on questions that we received and trying to make sure that we get responses and that what they perceived happened actually happened. So there's still a lot of additional information that will be in the final report, as well as some of the promises and expectations from the implementation.
Thank you. And just to that point, we had, I'm sorry, I have the floor. And to that point, there were several speakers today regarding elections and some of the problems. The gentleman from Raytheon, and there was a lady from, I forget where now. Yes, Shelley, yeah. And I would hope that we could address some of their concerns in that final report. That would be helpful. And gentlemen, can we just ratchet down the rhetoric? And because I don't think it's accomplishing anything but disenfranchising voters, frankly.
Chair Bronson?
Supervisor.
I do think it's noteworthy that we've had a handful of complaints and overwhelmingly people were able to vote effectively, able to submit their voice, and I just think it's important for us to keep note of the fact that we did have a new process roll out and that a lot of the concerns with some of the training, with a couple of sites that had to wait, that's something that's very normal in all elections. I mean, some of those processes are things that happen all the time. I've waited in a line for 2 hours to vote. I didn't know what the reason was, but there I was. And so I just think that, we need to give a little bit of grace in some of these situations and understand that there's a lot of focus on voting right now. It is a topic of national debate and a lot of angst, and I wish that all of us would just keep that in mind.
Ratchet down the rhetoric and keep it in perspective. I agree, but again, I think that when we've made mistakes and where there have been problems, we need to own it, whether it's the recorder or the elections director or this board. And I think by trying to, by being less than transparent, that doesn't help give people the confidence that their vote counted. And I think that's what we all want to do. All right, let's move on then to item 16, update on the RTA Next Plan. Supervisor Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As all of you know, I am the county's representative to the Pima Association of Governments Regional Council and also to the Regional Transportation Authority Board. We are moving towards the development of an RTA Next Plan that will be put before the voters sometime before the current plan expires. The current plan was passed by Pima County voters in 2006 and expires in 2026. So obviously we need to have an election prior to 2026 when that plan expires. And I wanted to share with all of you some documents that have been given to the RTA board about the status of the current RTA plan and about the development of a new RTA plan. And I just want to walk you through some of these documents, and I will have another update for you in October. No, I'm sorry, actually more likely November, because the board will be making some decisions, as you will see.
And by the board, you mean the RTA board?
Yes, ma'am, the RTA board. So the first thing I wanted to cover with you, and it's the first item that is attached to our agenda, is a memorandum from Mr. Mogimi, the RTA Executive Director, to the RTA Board. It was sent to us the day after our last meeting. Our last meeting was August 25th. This memo is dated August 26th. And just to hit some of the high points, and all of you have these documents attached to the item, and they've been attached since last week, and I thank the clerk for her help with that. There's really approximately $99 to $141 million of additional funds that are needed to complete the current RTA plan. Wanted to share one particular part of this memorandum with you. It starts at the paragraph that says the current plan of action. The current plan of action, as mentioned at yesterday's meeting, is to have funding options packaged for you, meaning the RTA Board, to consider before the October meeting so that you can come prepared to act at the meeting, if so desired, on both how to address costs for remaining 2006 RTA plan projects and establishing a budget for RTA Next. As you know, the challenges we are facing not only are revenue-based but also are cost-based, with more recent spikes in delivery prices. Other contributing factors to the challenges include more limited access to materials, the availability of a skilled labor force, and capacity of the jurisdiction and local contracting community to complete the work on schedule. At our June 2nd meeting, the RTA Board voted unanimously, 9-0, to move 2 current RTA projects to RTA Next. One of them is a county project, First Avenue from River up to Ina, and the other one is a project that is on Silver Bell Road and is a joint operation of the county and Marana. And those projects, by the way, are at the bottom of this memo. They're highlighted, number 5 and number 13. The only remaining projects on the current RTA plan are city projects, projects within the boundaries of the city of Tucson, and so there is discussion going on right now between PAG and RTA staff and City of Tucson staff about which, if any, city RTA projects will also be considered for moving to RTA Next. Those are the issues that we're going to have to consider at the October RTA Board meeting. The next document was previously sent to you. I sent it to you after I got it. It's dated August 8th. It is to the RTA Board from Mr. Mogimi, and the most important part of it is the calendar that you will see, the bulleted calendar that you will see about the different benchmarks that we need to meet, the different dates that we need to meet associated with those benchmarks for development of an RTA Next plan. And again, the October meeting will be a very critical one for the board. The next 2 documents I wanted you to take a look at. The Citizens Advisory Committee is the group that is appointed by the RTA Board to develop the RTA Next plan. And they put together a framework that will help to guide their discussions and guide their work together. They initially put together a framework for plan development. That's the first document that you see. Back in January of 2020. Obviously, what intervened 2 months after that was the COVID-19 pandemic. The previous RTA Board had set a sunset date for the work of that Citizens Advisory Committee for last summer. Well, nobody knew when they set that sunset date that we were going to have the intervening pandemic, and so when the CAC ended, there were approximately 13 of the 35 members who didn't want to continue on a new CAC. So we appointed 13 new members, appointed them unanimously, by the way, and those new members worked with the veteran members and also with the Technical Management Committee to come up with new guiding principles and goals. That is the second document. And we had a presentation from Tom McGovern, who is the chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and Carolyn Campbell, who is one of the 2 co-chairs, along with Mary Veras, at our August 25th meeting about how the CAC worked together and then how they worked with the TMC to come up with those revised guiding principles and goals. There were some concerns about the revised guiding principles and goals that were presented at our last meeting by the towns of Marana and Sahuarita, and Mr. McGovern said that those concerns would be discussed by the CAC, and if necessary, they'll make revisions to the guiding principles and goals. The last document that I have for you is a September 1st memorandum from Charlene Robinson, who is the chair of the Citizens Accountability for Regional Transportation Committee. This is a citizens group that was formed in 2006 to oversee the execution of the current RTA plan. And Ms. Robinson not only sent this memo to the CART committee, but also copied the RTA board. And she touches on some of the financial issues that were mentioned in some of the earlier documents. If you go to the bottom of the first page, she says, for a reminder, the ballot-approved budget for the 2006 voter-approved RTA projects was $1.9 billion. The current tax revenue estimate through June 2026 is $1.6 billion. To make up the approximate $300 million difference, the RTA board directed federal and state transportation funds that come into the region annually be applied from fiscal year 2020 to fiscal year 2026 to fund the voter-approved plan budget. That action addressed lower than anticipated RTA tax revenues to cover the $300 million gap. She also, and this is why this paragraph is in bold, says prior to 2020, programming RTA revenues below the 2006 ballot amount was sufficient to complete most projects. Since 2017, project cost increases began to trend upward, including significant increases in the last 2 years. During the same time, RTA revenue collections improved, and the RTA board has also already been committed to make those additional funds eligible for eligible costs to complete projects. She says, for the first time in the history of the RTA, and in line with the January 2022 direction from the board, the RTA provided RTA funding over the ballot amount to 3 different projects. And those projects, by the way, were Downtown Links, the county's Sunset Project, and also the Tangerine Road Project, which crosses County, Marana, and Oro Valley. And then she references the additional $150 million that's going to be needed based on current cost estimates to cover remaining project costs. And references also in her memo decisions that are going to have to be made by the RTA board and hopefully with input from the city of Tucson about existing RTA projects that need to be moved to RTA Next, because as I said before, the only remaining RTA projects are City of Tucson projects, and some of them are going to have to be moved to RTA Next to meet that shortfall. Those are the decisions that we'll be making in October. I realize that that was a lot, Madam Chair, and that's why I wanted all of you to have the documents before this meeting, and so that the public could see these documents if they want to access the agenda item. I'm happy to entertain any questions from you or my colleagues about where the RTA board and the Citizens Action Committee is in this process.
I'm just wondering about some of the legality. It's probably too early, but moving some of this to RTA Next without going back to the voters who approved this current RTA plan. And you're right, we never anticipated COVID, and supply chain is, well, everything's costing more because of limited supplies. But this is going to be interesting to see. I'm thinking we may, somewhere down the line, need a legal opinion on some of this. But again, that's, having served on that board, I think some of this may have to go back to the voters prior to RTA Next, but I could be wrong.
And the board, the RTA board does have legal counsel. You'll see his name, Mr. Benavidez, attached to most of these memoranda.
I'm aware, I'm just thinking we want a third opinion. I'm not comfortable with his opinion, I guess.
Okay.
But thank you for the update, and thank you for the work you're doing. I'm glad it's not me, having to sit through those meetings. Okay, there's no action here, right? You're just...
No, I just wanted to give you an update, and we'll have another one most likely in November.
November, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So, sorry, Chair Bronson. Yeah, and Supervisor Scott, I thank you for the update. I'm just wondering, though, like, a little bit like the chair was saying in terms of, can we move these things?
Your mic.
Right. Oh,
your mic.
I'm sorry. My bad. I also wonder about the legality of you can shift these things, like would the city of Tucson be okay with that? Do they have to be, I don't know, do they have to be consulted? And there seems to be like some fuzzy math going on here, and I know just from the information I'm getting, there's just some, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of transparency consistently from the executive director, and I'm incredibly frustrated by this, to have projects get sort of tossed, to have some of these numbers have gone up by 30%, like overnight. I don't know where this came from compared, like in terms of attachments. For example, the numbers presented to the RTA board on the 25th of August were not the same as the numbers that the executive director produced the very next day that we're seeing now, that they're just 30% inflated. Why? What is going on with that? Why do we have to tell the citizens who approved this 20 years ago, and this is not, by the way, directed at you personally, Supervisor Scott, please don't think of that at all, but we have a duty to the taxpayers who voted for this 20 years ago to try to actually be, to do what it is that they told us to do in terms of the named projects, including the two that we talked about at the beginning that you mentioned will possibly have to get pushed to another voter-approved tranche of funds, which going to the voters and asking them for money doesn't always work, as we know here in Pima County, right, that we've had some lack of success in terms of getting bonds passed. So I'm worried in a lot of levels. I would like to hear, Supervisor Scott, from you about has there been some kind of review of the executive director? How is that going? And kind of, regardless of I shouldn't say regardless, I would like to see any information if he has had a review. I don't know that he has had a review, but when this kind of colossal financial failure, and it's not necessarily all on one person, but combined with a lack of transparency, like the shifting strange numbers and memos from one day to the next, asking the mayor of Tucson to make decisions on these very, very impactful projects without the correct or accurate or up-to-date information that apparently the executive director did have. I don't know. I would strongly, I think, okay, I will move, and maybe no one will second, but I would like to direct you, Supervisor Scott, to move at the next meeting to terminate the contract with the current executive director, effective immediately. And I would really like someone to second that. But
Supervisor Scott is the one who usually seconds for purposes of discussion. But I am not going to second. I think that I certainly share your concerns, but I think that's not our place. It's not our place at this point. I think that's something that, the timing, right?
Chair Bronson, just to piggyback, my issue, I guess, is that we don't have any authority other than asking Supervisor Scott, hey, go with that. But we can't really request of him either, unless he wants to do that. So that's sort of my issue.
But Supervisor Scott can put that motion forward on behalf of Pima County as our representative to the RTA board.
But he's also an individual. So I don't know that he wants to.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, I don't.
There is, without question, a revenue shortfall that is coupled with increasing costs for construction that have been exacerbated as we've come out of the pandemic, that is indisputable. I absolutely agree with Supervisor Hines and yourself that the fact that those figures change frequently is frustrating and confusing. I don't think that that is directly the result of one person's actions or inaction so much as it has to do with a muddled situation that no one is completely clear on. But the fact that there is a revenue shortfall and that we are not going to be able to complete all of the projects in the current RTA plan is indisputable. That is why the board voted unanimously, the RTA board voted unanimously to move the two projects that I mentioned previously to RTA Next. And one of the reasons our attorney said that that was suitable was that there were scope changes to both of those projects, and it was appropriate for the voters to give thumbs up or thumbs down. The other thing that the board has said is that if an RTA Next plan is not passed by the voters, then the board will work with the jurisdictions to make sure that every plan, every project in the current RTA plan is completed, because that was the commitment that was made to the voters in 2006. So those projects being completed is not dependent on an RTA Next plan being passed. As far as the executive director's review goes, there was a document that was presented to the RTA board for its consideration. It was drafted by a subcommittee of some of our members. That document was found wanting by the board, and so there is continuing discussion and work being done on a 360 review document. My understanding is that that may be on our agenda for October. I heard that from one of our colleagues who is most interested in that 360 review moving forward. So that's why there hasn't been that review, because there's been disagreement within the board about the draft document that was given to us for evaluation. And the desire for a more substantive document and one that included input from all the stakeholders who have some interest in the performance of the executive director.
Thank you. And Chair Bronson, if I could just, a couple more questions real quick.
Yeah, real quick, because
understood.
Supervisor Grijalva has to exit stage left.
Okay. So then, Supervisor Scott, then has there been, I guess, for the entire tenure of the current executive director, has there been any review or any sort of, there has, okay, that's good. I would be curious to hear about that. And you can just get this to me later, but, and then, yeah, okay. I think that's it for me then.
Thank you.
And those would have been done by previous boards, Madam Chair, but my understanding is that they were done. I'm not sure of the process or the document. If there was a document, I know that each time the gentleman's contract was renewed, there was discussion by previous boards of his performance.
Oh my gosh, Chair Bronson, I'm sorry. Never trust a politician. I have one more quick thing. What is the current tenure, like when does his contract term, like when is it done? When is there a natural sunset or stopping point to the existing contract with the executive director?
I don't know the answer to that question right offhand.
When I was on the board, it was every year, but that may have changed.
Thank you.
All right.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, so for the record, Supervisor Hines' motion dies for lack of a second?
Yes. Sorry. Hope springs eternal. All right, let's move on. I think we're on item 17 now. And Supervisor Hines, you put the item on the agenda.
What are we doing? I'm sorry. Let's see. did you say 16 or 17?
17. We
Oh,
just
17,
finished
okay.
16.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so I really appreciate all the work that the staff has done on this. It's a lot, and this is a phased approach to a comprehensive implementation of some additional leave, making us more competitive, as you see from the staff memo. I like almost everything about this. My one hesitation, though, is that I really want to find a way to, at least for the section that is applying to people that are being hired back who within 5 years had previously done work for the county and have some, status at that tenure, basically seniority at that point. I would really like to try to make that particular provision as retroactive as practicable, or just because it seems kind of, that doesn't seem like particularly onerous, and I wanted to ask staff actually if that is, I guess, two things. A question to Sam Brown from the legal side of things: is that okay? If we do that, some kind of retroactivity for that particular situation, even if it's just the beginning of the year, that'd be great. And then to Administrator Lesher, what the staff might think about that for that particular provision.
So that's just by way of direction?
Well, I'd like an answer now if I can have one.
Supervisor Bronson, Supervisor Hines, we can look into that. I don't have that exact answer right now.
And Chair Bronson, Supervisor Hines, we had recommended that all of the 8 events take place starting at the first of the year, but if you were looking at simply item 6, which is the retroactivity back for 5 years, we could do that prior to the first of the year, but I'd like to confer with staff about exactly when we could put that into place, because it would take a little bit of time. We can probably do it retroactively, but it might be a little bit of time until we get it completed.
Okay, great. Then I think with that understanding, I'm happy to move forward with this item as it has been presented to us by staff.
The county administrator's recommendation?
Yes.
I'll second.
Thank you.
A motion and a second. I am not going to vote in favor of this. I think we're headed in the right direction, but what concerns me is this is basically to bring people back into employment and/or to attract new people. We're not taking care of the people that that are working for us now. And that's, and I've said it before, it's just combining sick leave with vacation and putting it all in one packet. Why aren't we rewarding our employees who work hard? And we should be doing it.
If I may, Chair Bronson, that all of the employees would be receiving the additional days. So that does reward our current employees. It also, for current employees, increases the number of days that they can maintain in their bank from 240.
So why do we have to limit the number of days?
Because Chair Bronson, the significant cost is only when we are paying someone off at the end of their employment.
For all the good work they did.
That's the policy decision.
We certainly do it for our high-level employees. Why don't we do it for everybody?
Chair Bronson? Oh, I'm sorry.
Supervisor Grijalva.
I think it's smart to have a cap on annual leave. I appreciate that it's getting increased, but having been on a board where we paid out significant thousands of hours of leave, it's a huge hit to our budget, and one that you can't really anticipate because you don't know when the person is going to leave the organization. You don't know what their salary might be at that time, and so what do you do with accrual? Do you try to say, okay, so this 320 hours was accrued when they were making this amount, then we move up? I mean, it could be the impact to our budget is really could be very significant, and it was in the case of a few administrators that started out in entry-level positions and then moved up. So I think this makes sense. I think that we're increasing the number of opportunities. I really do think it overall makes the most sense to just go to a PTO bank at some point, but this is a nice transition to looking at that, and so I'm comfortable supporting it as submitted.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Was that Supervisor Christie? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to remind the board of my past opposition to this, which is based on the fact that there's really been no significant cost analysis, and that it should be part of the classification and compensation study. This is a perfect piece that should be included in that analysis, and it's not forthcoming. So I also would like to see how many former employees come back after the law goes into effect on 9/29. Before we start spending all kinds of money on benefits, let's see what happens after September 29th, when the mandates are lifted. So I will be voting no on this for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Christie. And to Supervisor Grijalva's point, I understand about the potential costs. But again, I'm looking at employees, not at the higher administrative levels, but down in the ranks that probably don't have the money to take vacations. And I just don't think we're serving them well when they've really committed to the county. And it's probably the only job they've ever had, or a long-term job. So I'm just concerned that we're not dealing with those.
Yeah, Chair Bronson, I think it would be helpful to get a report from HR for how many employees actually have to lose vacation time. See if it's something that's specific to a certain department. That was the case in my other board life, and so what you'd have is, you'd have employees that just really couldn't take time off, and maybe this is something that we can look at specific to those, that employee group.
Get a report.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
How many? Yep, that would be great.
Chair Bronson.
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Hines and Supervisor Christie.
And actually to Administrator Lesher, aside from the end of service sort of, we can't necessarily predict some of the banked.
End of service is kind of a scary term these days.
And
means something different to different people.
Oh, meaning at the end of someone's tenure with the county when they have banked hours that are okay.
End of service for law enforcement has a different, and for the military has a different connotation.
Okay. So with regard to the cost to the county taxpayers, what, again, I know predicting the cash out of banked time off is hard to predict, but other than that, as proposed, what is a ballpark cost to the county taxpayers, if you can give us an assessment of that?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Hines, again, it's the payout that's in question, and I don't have the analysis of that. Whether we pay someone 2,080 hours a year, some of those days they work, some of those are vacation days. And so if we simply are increasing the vacation days, the amount that's actually compensated to that individual has not increased.
So there should be no...
Other than the payout days, and that's what we need to evaluate.
No significant, de minimis or no significant cost to the county taxpayers to do this change in leave policy. Thank you.
All right, have we exhausted our...
Yes. Madam Chair?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's Supervisor Christie, I apologize.
Two things. First, do we have any indication or any idea of when we might get that classification and compensation study?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, into next year. It will not be before the end of this calendar year.
Based on that, I would like to continue this item for further discussion and analysis to the second meeting in October.
So you're doing a substitute motion?
Yes.
Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Moving on to the original motion, is there any further discussion? Roll call vote.
Okay, this is approval as of the county administrator's recommendation.
Yes.
Supervisor Christie.
No.
Supervisor Grijalva.
Yes.
Supervisor Hines.
Yes.
Supervisor Scott.
Yes.
Chair Bronson.
No. By your vote of 3-2, motion carries. Moving on to item 18, County Administrator Update. Ms. Lesher.
Chair Bronson, if I may, I only have one item today, and I think...
Thank you.
At the beginning of the meeting, I'm sure that we had hoped to have a moment of silence in recognition of the constable who we recently lost, Deborah Martinez Garibay, and I would simply request for she and the others who lost their lives that day that we observe a moment of silence.
And I'm sorry, I had intended to do that, and then it didn't happen. My apologies. So,
thank you.
Moment of silence. Okay, thank you, Ms. Lesher.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 19, Clerk of the Board, Avon Valley Irrigation and Drainage District Annual Election Cancellation. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, any objection? Hearing none, motion carries.
Chair Bronson, I just had a question. Why wasn't this item under elections? Is it just...
Why is it under Clerk of the Board?
Right.
Melissa will have the answer.
Chair
I
Bronson,
don't.
Supervisor Grijalva, the Clerk of the Board's office handles special taxing districts
Okay,
for
great.
irrigation districts.
Thank you so much. Just curiosity. Thanks.
All right. Moving on, Community and Workforce Development, Local Workforce Development Area Plan Modification 2020 to 2023. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to Development Services, item 21, Final Plat. I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion, objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to elections, items 22 through 27. If nobody wishes to divide the question, I'll move those items.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
could I ask you to please amend your motion to include item 32, since it is also an election cancellation?
Sure. Item 32, General Election School. Okay, so it's items 22 through 27 and item 32 and resolution 2022-57-58, 59, 60, 61, and then that's it. So if there are no, is there any discussion on these items? Any objections?
Madam Chair, do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Yeah, okay. If there's no discussion, no objections, motion carries. So that brings us to item 28 and resolution 2022-62. I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any objections? Any discussion first? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to Human Resources, item 29, revisions to personnel policy. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'll move the item.
I'll second.
You'll second? Motion and a second. Discussion?
Madam Chair?
Okay. Supervisor Grijalva, then Supervisor Christie.
Thank you. Thank you. This is just the addition of a Juneteenth celebration day.
Right.
So I wanted to acknowledge that and thank you to the staff.
Supervisor Christie.
Yes, this also should be included in the cost analysis with the, as I stated the last time that this issue came up, that it really needs to be part of the classification and compensation study. There's been no cost analysis, and the constable will have to be voting against it.
All right, any further discussion? Objections?
I object.
One objection, Supervisor Christie. No further objections. Motion carries 4-1. We now move on to Industrial Development Industrial Development Authority, Resolution 2022-63. I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to procurement, item 31. What's the pleasure of the board? I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. We're now on hearings, franchises, license and permits, items, well, there's just one. Item 33. This is a hearing. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us on this item at this time? If not, I move to close public hearing and approve the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion, objections, hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 34. This is a hearing for a specific plan, P2022 SP 00001, Wong Family LP, North Thornydale, specific plan rezoning. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair, I believe Mr. Juniman is here to address the board and would request that he have the opportunity to do so.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Supervisors, I'm Rory Juniman, 5983 East Grant Road. We represent the Channing Corporation for this specific plan. Supervisor Scott asked that I make a quick presentation about our specific plan, if that's okay.
Proceed.
All right, and I think we have a few slides. Okay. All right, so we are requesting a specific plan for a personal storage project. Please, next slide. It's located at the southeast corner of Thornydale and Overton. It's just east of Arthur Pack Park. Next slide, please. So this is an unusual rezoning because the property is already CB1. It's already a business zone. We're requesting to put a personal storage project. CB1 allows personal storage, but it only allows one story. If we were building an office, we could build a 39-foot building. We could put multiple fast food restaurants on it, but the zoning code has this unique restriction on personal storage uses. Next slide, please. And that's because when the code was written, storage was, like you see up in the top corner, kind of one-story metal buildings. Now, modern storage is much different. It's multiple stories. It's designed to look like Class A office and retail businesses. More importantly, it is designed to where all the impacts from the use are really inside. People do all their loading and unloading from inside the building. It's a very low traffic and parking use, and it has really little impact on the surrounding neighbors. Next slide, please. So this is a site plan of our project. I won't go into any details. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But I just wanted to point out that all of our loading and unloading is going to occur at the back of the project. There's security access. People go in, have their code or their card, go inside, the garage closes. They do all their unloading and unloading, and again, it's a very low impact use on the surrounding neighbors. Next slide, please. We've also designed this to have an enhanced sort of architectural look and feel. We're using multiple materials, stucco, glazing, metal, to actually make it look really nice. Next slide, please. This is the rear where all the loading and unloading will occur. Next slide. We also engaged will engage Joe Pagic, a local artist, to do a mural on the project. This is something that happens more in the city, but our client, Zach Channing from Channing Corporation, has used Mr. Pagic on some other projects here in town and really likes the idea of a mural. I think it'll really add something to the project. Next slide, please. Just a brief history. We had our neighborhood meeting back in June, middle of June this year. The neighbors at first were skeptical, but once we explained to them the use and that it really will have low impact, they were fine with the use, and we haven't had any neighbor input since. We did agree at that meeting to provide a wall at the southeast corner along the back of the project, and they were happy with that. P&Z, we got a 7-3 recommendation to approve. The only questions or concerns at that meeting was the height. We wanted to point out that 3 stories is not uncommon in this area. In fact, at Thornydale and Tangerine, there's a 3-story storage project already. It's in the town of Marana, but it's just north of us. And as far as the conservation land system, that was met in the prior rezoning, so there's no issues with that. And with that, we're agreeable to all the conditions, and we just respectfully request you approve our specific plan, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
Madam Chair.
Supervisor.
My question's not for Mr. Junman, it's for either Mr. DeBonis or Mr. Poirier with staff. They were kind enough to answer some questions that I had prior to today's meeting about conditions that have been put in place by the Regional Flood Control District. But there's also an environmental planning condition. It's number 7. It says, upon the effective date of the ordinance, the owner shall have a continuing responsibility to remove buffalo grass from the property. And I just wanted to know, is that the kind of condition that is standard in these situations, and is it one that we can expect to see more frequently given the ongoing nature of the challenge of dealing with buffalo grass in our region?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, you're correct. You should see that condition with every new rezoning. We are implementing that as a condition. It's a tool to help us try to fight the invasive species of buffalo grass.
Thank you. And then I did have one question, Mr. Junman. We talked about some of the items that were concerns of the neighbors, and you had mentioned that what was previously considered for that project, for that pad, was a completely different project that the neighbors would have had more concerns with. What was the original proposal for that pad?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, the original plan for the site was actually 3 fast food restaurants with drive-thrus, which would created considerably more traffic and noise and light. So when we explained that to the neighbors, they were very happy with this use. This use has maybe 180 trips a day, very low traffic generating, and like I said, everything really occurs inside, so there's really no nuisance factors with this use.
And then one other quick question, Madam Chair, is that there's reference in the minutes from the Planning and Zoning Commission to testimony from the Coalition for Snow and Desert Preservation. I'm sorry, if you could speak to the work that you and your client did with the coalition that led to their remarks, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott. For this project, it was actually pretty easy because there was a rezoning on this site in 2018. At that time, the CLS was met, all the off-site mitigation land was donated. We were just taking an existing commercially zoned site and just modifying it really for height. So when we talked to Ms. Campbell and Ms. McVie at the coalition, they were agreeable to this. They were fine with it because it had already been met.
And didn't they also address some of the concerns raised by a couple of the commissioners regarding the height of the facility?
Yes, they I'm putting words in their mouth, but in their view, developing sites that have smaller footprints and more height is something that is generally a good thing to them. It takes up less open space, takes up less just development area. So they were supportive of this, of that aspect of this project.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if there's no other questions from my colleagues or...
And we have no speakers, so...
Okay. then I would move that we close the public hearing and take the recommendation of the Planning and Zoning Commission and staff to approve the item subject to standard and special conditions.
And that's P...
I'll second.
I'll second. Okay, there's a motion and a second, and just this is a specific plan rezoning, P22 SP 00001.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Any further discussion, objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 35 has been continued until the board meeting of October 18th. That brings us to item 36. It's a rezoning, P22RZ 00004, Long Living Trust, West Valencia Road rezoning. Supervisor Grijalva.
Yes. Do we have any speakers?
I think we have several speakers, 3.
Okay, I'd like to go ahead and hear them.
You'd like to hear the speakers?
Yes, please, thank you.
All right. Gayla Lucas. David Swenson. Howard Beckler. Those are the speakers, and I don't see that they're here.
Okay. So I'd like to go ahead and recommend that we close the public hearing and recommend approval subject to standard and special conditions.
As recommended by both staff and the commission, correct?
Yes. The biggest issue with the commission is the traffic issues that are just continue to be a problem, and then we continue to develop. There's another, prior on the agenda, there was continuance that's going to also add. I think we really, my biggest concern...
We need to do something with Valencia Road.
Actually, Valencia, Ajo, all of those feeders, we have huge developments, really big homes that are out in that area, and I live over there, and we live over there. It takes, on a Sunday afternoon, it take 15 minutes to get somewhere, and on a Monday morning, it's a good 45 minutes to an hour. So, and we continue to build out in that area. They're huge homes, 2- and 3-car garages, so we can't rely just on RTA Next. And I appreciate Mr. DeBonis, you getting back some information to us, but in that area, we're going to have to really look at the infrastructure and the roads there.
I couldn't, I definitely agree, but just so you're aware, this was a designated growth area, but clearly the planning on the traffic end has not happened, and it needs to.
Right. And I will, especially for the representative from District 5, their no had to do with the impact on traffic, not so much this specific development.
Yep. All right.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor.
Just consistent with the concerns just expressed by you and Supervisor Grijalva, one of the transportation conditions, it's 2A, speaks to the need, the requirement for a traffic impact study to be submitted for review and approval by the Department of Transportation with the tentative plat submittal. Off-site improvements determined necessary as a result of the traffic impact study shall be provided by the property owner. I'd appreciate it if either Mr. DeBonis or Mr. Poirier could address that item and also address something that I think the board is aware of, which is that the Planning and Zoning Commission has a study session, work session coming up regarding overall traffic conditions in that area. If you could address both those items, I'd appreciate it.
Madam Chair and Supervisors, transportation staff is aware of the challenges on Valencia Road. In fact, they're undertaking some study work. So in the near future, we can bring an update to the board on what that will entail and talk to you about the variety of options that are being looked at, both widening of the road as well as how do you incorporate more demand management strategies, so getting people off of the peak travel hours. So we'll bring that information back to you. As was noted, the Planning and Zoning Commission has asked asked for a study session at their September meeting, so that will be progressing. Transportation staff will participate along with Development Services staff in that study session, and we will likely hear a number of questions and be able to glean good input to help us as we work forward to try and address those traffic needs on Valencia Road. The existing impact fee benefit area and the ordinance does have included in there widening of Valencia from Mission to Cardinal. So with collected impact fees, that is a project that's eligible under our existing impact fee ordinance. And then within RTA Next, and I understand Supervisor Grijalva, that's a longer time frame. We do have Mission all the way out to Camino de la Tierra. So we will get together and bring some information back to the board on specifically what we're doing. To Supervisor Scott's question about traffic impact study, those are typical with new development. So consulting engineer, traffic engineer will work with the project developer, will submit a plan to the county that includes information on existing traffic volumes, what direction those vehicles are traveling, what the impacts are at intersections. They will then also forecast or project what the volume from their development is, the direction that those trips will be headed, and then what the impact on the roadway is. And it will also include then a recommendation, if warranted, based on those impacts for off-site improvements. So those can be turn lanes, acceleration lanes, deceleration lanes, traffic signals in some instances. It just varies based on the specifics. So that's what that traffic impact study will include.
One real quick question. Ajo is an ADOT project, correct? Well, it's not a question. Any update on when and if what they're going to do with Ajo, especially from Kinney, the intersection of Kinney and Ajo, out to the airport,
Yes, Supervisor Bronson, you're correct.
Valencia.
Ajo is a state highway. We can reach out to Rod Lane, the district engineer here in this region, and ask for an update on that. And I think to your point being, transportation department also looking at Irvington, and if Irvington is extended to the west and connects into Ajo, that could provide some additional route for vehicles traveling in that general
because I know Supervisor Grijalva. I mean, if we come down Ajo and there's an accident,
that's the end of it. That's your mornings.
Your mornings just went away.
Yeah, there's the, Chair Bronson, the other issue the concern that I have is because people are trying to avoid Valencia because of the backup, then you create these other domino issues on Irvington and Ajo, and there really isn't a shoulder, and so, drivers are creating shoulders where they don't exist, which becomes incredibly dangerous for everybody. And I know that area, especially right there on Valencia and Camino Verde, is a pretty high accident area, and I think a lot of that has to do with frustration and coming down, and there's just real big problems that we need to address, and I think that the P&Z Commission is basically taking a position that, we're gonna stop even supporting any of these projects until the transportation issues are addressed. So I appreciate you looking into it, and getting in touch with ADOT would be very helpful.
All right, I think we've exhausted our pontificating. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. And again, it's approval subject to standard and special conditions, and closing the hearing. Any objections?
Madam Chair, excuse me, I need a seconder.
I did second, I think.
She did second.
You made the motion, Supervisor Grijalva.
Oh.
I seconded it.
Okay.
Okay, there we go.
Object.
You object? There's one objection. Any further objections? Supervisor Hines objected. Hearing none, motion carries 4-1. Moving on to item 37, P22RZ0007, Frost Holding Company, LLC, number 2 LLC, North La Cañada Drive rezoning. Supervisor Scott.
Madam Chair, if there's nobody here to address the board on this item, I move that we approve the rezoning subject to the standard and special conditions put in place by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
And close the hearing.
And close the hearing.
A motion and a second by Supervisor Christie. Any discussion?
Chair Bronson?
Yeah.
I would be in favor, if we can take these questions separately, I am in favor of the rezoning time extension, not in favor of, and would like to deny the modification of the rezoning.
This is item 37.
I apologize, I'm on 38. Yep, we're good.
Okay. And we have to take those separately.
Great.
On 38, yeah. Okay, there's a motion and a second on the floor. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 38, this is a hearing for a time extension, and it's, actually there are two. And item A is the time extension, and it's C090530, Stewart Title Trust, Kinney Road rezoning. Staff is recommending approval subject to modified standard and special conditions. Is there anyone, this is a hearing, anyone in the audience that wishes to address us in opposition? I am going to move to close the public hearing and approve the extension as recommended, subject to modified standard and special condition as recommended by staff. Do I have a second? I have a second from Supervisor Christie. Any discussion, any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item B, hearing modification, substantial change of rezoning condition, again, C09-05-30. The commission has voted to approve, subject to modified standard and special conditions, and staff has recommended approval, subject to modified standard and special conditions. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us in opposition to this item at this time? If not, I'm going to move to close public hearing and approve as recommended.
Second.
Motion and a second. Let's do, if there's any discussion.
Chair Bronson?
Supervisor Grijalva.
So, my big concern with this one is that it is, it's really sprawl. This development is 450 single-family residential subdivisions that traverses over 140 acres of land that it's not part of the Marie-Behan Conservation Land System, it is still an important part of our ecosystem. This project was bulldozed, vital riparian habitat, which, life in this desert depends. Even if the vegetation is not cut down, it would definitely be disturbed by the proximity of the construction. And so I'm very concerned with the additional, the modification of the rezoning, and that's why I'm voting against it.
All right, any further discussion? Let's do a roll call vote. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yes, Chair Bronson, I would like to echo the comments of my colleague Supervisor Grijalva. This is a 146-acre parcel with basically untouched desert on, I believe, all sides. I think that we obviously do need to address affordable housing. We need to make our urban core more dense, and we need to probably revise some of our zoning codes at the city and county level to help make that happen, which is a future discussion, I know, but this really is sprawl, and I think we need to, I'm going to be voting no as well.
All right, and just for the record, I think that's pretty much bulldozed already. All right, let's do a roll call vote.
Okay, and this is for approval, subject to modified standard and special conditions.
Correct.
Supervisor Christie?
Yes.
Supervisor Grijalva?
No.
Supervisor Hines?
No.
Supervisor Scott?
Yes.
Chair Bronson?
Yes, by your vote of 3-2, motion carries. All right, moving on to item 39, P22TA 00004, Development Services Fee Ordinance Revision. This is a hearing, and I don't know if Angela Nelson is still, there you go. Again, you have 3 minutes, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Madam Chairperson and members of the board. I stand before you as a board member of the Tucson Celtic Festival Association, and this is in regards to the NRPR fee increases that are going to take place next year. We feel that they have unfairly targeted nonprofits in their fee increases. We specifically are a 100% volunteer-run, publicly funded organization to preserve Celtic culture. We host Highland Games. We provide education, workshops, entertainment, everything across the board of Celtic culture. Reedo Raceway Park has been our home for the last 22 years. As of 2015, they had increased our rates already. We went from a standard daily rate to an additional $1 per person visitor increase in fees. That nearly doubled our fees for renting the park. Over 6 days, we currently pay roughly $10,000 to Pima County. This new increase in these rates is not a 10 or 20% increase. It is a 48.2 to 50% increase on our daily rates. This is very difficult for a nonprofit to absorb. We were nearly in collapse as of 2021. We had to redo everything, every aspect of our festival in order to continue, and we survived. Without help from the city, without help from the county, without help from really anyone. It was the blood, sweat, and tears of the 7 members of the board that allowed it to continue. And so I'm standing before you asking you, as the supervisors of NRPR, to really take a hard look at these new fees that they're implementing, because if it happens, we will have to consider moving our festival, one of the largest in the state, to outside, to Oro Valley, to Marana, to somewhere else, because we won't be able to afford it. If you don't know, Tucson is the home of the new chief of the Western United States. Clan McBain resides here in Tucson. And for us to have to move it out and away really is, in our eyes, frowned upon. We have grown to love Tucson and Reedo Park as our place, and we just hope that you would reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a response from staff? I'm really concerned about what I just heard.
Madam Chair, so before you today are amendments to the Development Services and Wastewater Fee Ordinances. So that's item number 39 is Development Services Fee Ordinance Revision, and item number 40 is Regional Wastewater Reclamation Department Fee Ordinance. So there are no fee changes before you today related to natural resources, parks, and recreation. So we have been out hosting public meetings. I'm happy to follow up with the speaker after
Yeah, I didn't think this had anything to do with NRPR.
So those fees have not been scheduled for public hearing yet. We did have a public comment period. We've hosted 2 public meetings. They are not yet scheduled for board consideration.
Can I get the speaker back up here? Why did you think this is actually subdivision road?
Right. I asked when I came in about where our the fees would fall, and I was told this portion.
So I don't think this is affecting you, is what I'm saying.
No problem.
But I hear what you're saying on the other piece. I have concerns too, so thank you. Yeah, I was just confused, because as I was looking at it, I didn't see what you saw or what you... Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Scott.
Thank you. I share your concerns, and I appreciate Mr. DeBonis following up with our speaker, because she also sent written communication to the board offices, and would very much like that input to be taken into consideration as we're moving forward with whatever finally comes before the board with regard to NRPR fees. And thank you.
And I'm concerned with NRPR fees. We're still in a COVID recovery period. We're headed into what looks like a recession. And yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting discussion this board needs to have. All right, I'm going to move approval. If there's nobody else in the audience that wishes to address us on this item, I'm going to move to close public hearing and approve ordinance number 2022-21. Do I have a second?
A second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 40, this is a hearing of fee ordinance revision for P22TA 00005, Regional Wastewater Reclamation, and it's ordinance number 2022-20. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address us in opposition to this item at this time? If not, I'm going to move close public hearing and approve ordinance number 2022-20. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Moving on to the addendum agenda, which I can't seem to find at the moment. Oh, yes, here we go. We've already done item number 1. Let's move to item number 2, COVID-19 employee mandates. Supervisor Christie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our office reached out to try to find what the status is of the COVID mandates as far as they pertain for hiring and promotion for Pima County employees. So my question I would direct it to administration is what is the current and official COVID-19 vaccine mandate for hiring and promotion, and where do we find such official policy on the vaccine mandate regarding hiring and promotion?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, happy to go through these. Let me mention first that I know that there has been some confusion about when things might end, and as noted earlier, legislation passed at the state level. That means that as of September 24th, Pima County will not be enforcing a variety of these, or on any of these mandates. Our plan has been to come to the board at the September 20th meeting and make sure that all of the various policies and rules in effect go out of effect at that time so that we remain consistent with state law. At this point, I'm just looking through, we have, there was a directive, county administrative directive on August 31st of 2021, mandated the vaccine mandate for new hires, promotions, and change in status. And then in September 7th of that year, approved by the board, was the health insurance medical premium for those who were not vaccinated. And in October of 21, early October 1st, new hires, promotional employees, and transferred change in status were to be fully vaccinated. Again, those are the policies that remain in place at this time, all of which will be going out of effect by the September 24th deadline.
I was referring, Madam Chair, directly to the hiring and promotion mandate, and the only item that we've been able to uncover is a August 31st, 2021 memorandum from Mr. Huckleberry that says, I am requiring that any newly employed individual be fully vaccinated before becoming employed with Pima County. I have instructed the Human Resources Director to ensure that any new employee of the county is required to provide proof of vaccination before employment. That was a memorandum and a direction from Mr. Huckleberry. Was this ever memorialized either as county administration policy, or was it ever memorialized as Board of Supervisors policy?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, I don't believe that there was a formal vote of the Board of Supervisors, but this was the direction of the county administrator on August 31st of 2021.
Well, then we did reach out to the Human Resources, and we asked about the status of such a mandate, and the response we received was, currently we have no administrative policy or Board of Supervisor policy that is in reference to the COVID vaccine mandate for hiring and promotion. This is dated August 19th of this past month. Again, we have no AP or Board of Supervisors policy that is in reference to the COVID-19 vaccine mandate for hiring and promotion. Also, Merit Rule 8, promotion, demotion, reappointment has no reference to the vaccine requirement. Then they refer to Mr. Huckleberry's direction. So this really has never been formalized or memorialized in any official capacity. Is that right?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I don't believe so. It has not been voted on by the Board of Supervisors.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Scott and then Supervisor
I don't mean to interrupt Supervisor Christie's line of questioning, but I think we did vote to approve the administrator's recommendations, and that we also, at that time, I think it was at the same time that we mandated vaccines only for employees who were working with at-risk populations, but I'd like to ask the clerk, and she may already be doing it, if she can respond to that, because I remember it was in that memorandum from Mr. Huckleberry, but then I think we approved his recommendations.
Chair Bronson, I also have a question about the wording on this item that says, I don't know, discussion, action, whatever, unvaccinated employees from the county administrator, human resources, and their legal representatives. Who's that? Who's their legal representatives?
It would be the county attorney or whoever represents the administration to get a legal definition of what's going on.
So you're not speaking about personal legal the way I read it, or it can be interpreted that, you know, it would be one thing for it to say, or, you know, county attorney, but when it says, and their legal representatives, I think it could be interpreted, and perhaps some people have, that this means like personal liability versus questions for the county. That's not the way you intended it. Okay.
That's not the way it was intended, but...
Okay, I just wanted to confirm.
I was always expecting the county attorney represented the board and the county, so
okay.
That's why I did that.
All right, thanks.
And back to Supervisor Scott, were you through on what you wanted to make your point there?
Thank you, Supervisor Christie. No, I was just asking the clerk to look back through the record and see if we did indeed approve those recommendations for hiring and promoting, and I think it was outside employment was included. My memory was that we did.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott,
Wait, the clerk is responding.
Yes, sorry. I'll need to follow up with you with that information. I cannot find it right now.
Okay.
And I'm quoting directly on hiring and promotion, and that's all. And according to Human Resources, and I have their response, there is no policy, either Board of Supervisors or administrative. But moving on.
There isn't a policy.
My next question is, can Pima County continue to charge Pima County employees $45 in insurance disincentive after the law on 9/29 goes into effect, lifting such penalties?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, we have been discussing those costs and plan to come to the board with a recommendation to remove that additional cost at the September 20th meeting.
Okay. I discussed the August 31st memorandum from Mr. Huckleberry. And moving on again, what is the current status of terminated employees due to refusing COVID vaccines now before the Merit Commission? And how many such involved cases were there? You've given us periodic updates. I think the last one was in June, but what is the status of terminated employees due to refusing COVID vaccines now before the Merit Commission?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I'm happy to follow up with a report to you regarding the exact status of all those individuals that have gone through the Merit Commission.
And along with that, to date, how many employees have asked for exemptions?
Happy to provide that.
And how many employees were denied exemptions?
Okay.
And how many employees quit in lieu of being terminated? And then while we're at it, might want to do some research on this too. What is the $45 disincentive impact been on the county's insurance status? We now have a year's worth of data, which we were told we would need in order to make a determination on that impact of the county self-insurance plan. And it has to be noted that we didn't need a year's worth of data to impose the $45 penalty. So if we could get a report on what the impact of the $45 disincentive policy had been on the county's insurance, I'd appreciate that along with the other ones.
Supervisor Hines, I think.
Thank you, Chair Bronson. And I guess this is more to staff, but it's my understanding that after September, and I might mess up the date, I think it's September 27th or 9th, or anyway, but in the next 3 weeks about...
24th?
Maybe it's the 24th. 24th? Okay. So
29th.
there's not... will there be any continued Pima... This is in regard to state legislative action taking effect, right? Like, will there be any ongoing... COVID-19 related employee mandates in force after the end of this month or in 3 weeks?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Hines, no.
That's what I thought. So I just wonder if maybe this sort of is asked and answered kind of situation. I don't really know if we need to continue this at this point.
Yeah, I have some other items too that would be germane to this as well. So having said all that, I'd like to make a motion that the board move to direct the Pima County Administrator to A, lift and remove the existing mandate requiring all Pima County employees to be COVID-19 vaccinated in order to be hired and or promoted. B, offer to rehire those former Pima County employees who lost their jobs due to their refusal to be vaccinated. Many, by the way, were terminated during the holidays, and refund them along with all back pay. And C, lift and remove health insurance disincentive of $45 for those who refuse to be vaccinated, along with full refunding of the disincentives that were charged them.
Chair Bronson, I would like to make a substitute motion.
Well, there's a motion that
sorry.
hasn't been seconded.
My bad.
Is there a second for this motion? Motion dies for lack of a second. Supervisor Hines.
Oh, I was actually going to make a motion that we move on to item number 3 and proceed with adjournment after a point of personal privilege that I would like to request.
Why don't you go with the personal privilege and then we'll go to item 3.
Okay, thanks so much. And I neglected to do this earlier, but I just wanted folks to join me in support of one of the victims in this tragedy. Angela Fox Heath has a GoFundMe page to support her family. I've contributed myself.
And by you mean the tragedy,
with regard to like Constable Martinez and the others who lost their lives, but in support of her family, I would strongly encourage folks to search for Angela Fox Heath at GoFundMe.com, and you can also look at my Twitter feed to find the link there. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's move on to item 3. It's recorder and approval of a $90,000 data management from the Special Revenue Fund. What's the pleasure of the board? After I heard comments this call to the public, I'm disinclined to vote for this item. I would prefer to continue it and explore some of the comments that were made about this may be problematic. It's a little concerning if this is going to be done at somebody's home. I've got questions, and I'm not comfortable voting for this at this point in time, so I
If
don't
the
know.
chair would like to make a motion to that effect, I'd second it to continue.
Continue it for our next meeting in September. We should be able to get, which is September which?
Our next meeting is September 20th.
September 20th. So I move to continue till September 20th. Supervisor Christie seconded that motion. Any discussion?
Chair Bronson, I guess my issue is how much of that information is...
accurate, I know.
Yeah.
But
I guess
it's enough to make me concerned.
All right.
Chair Bronson?
Madam Chair?
Staff have a response to what was presented to us?
I'm sorry. Supervisor Hines, then Supervisor Christie.
And Chair Bronson and Administrator Lesher, or anything that the gentleman was presenting to us with regard to this, is this really going to be run out of someone's personal residence? Like, is any of that something we can corroborate, or what? I just would love to hear more.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Hines, I am not aware of that information, and I'm happy to have this continued so we can look into it. We know that we had been working with the recorder on information related to database management of the Oracle database, which is more of the recorder side of the house, and had not had in-depth discussions on the voter registration side of the house, so happy to have that conversation, get the information, and come back in 2 weeks.
Okay. And speaking of the voter registration, we continue to get complaints or questions, and people are getting voter registration cards where they don't live. I don't know where that database, it's really happening. And so, is that a database from the Secretary of State's office? Where do they pull that? I have no clue.
Chair Bronson will be happy to work with the recorder and get you that information.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Supervisor Christie.
Yeah, one item too for that meeting that could be brought forth is, whose special revenue fund is this? Is it the county's? And what does that mean?
It's her.
Or is it the recorder's special revenue fund? And what does that mean? So I'd like to have a definition and a description of this quote-unquote special revenue fund.
That's just by way of direction. So we have a motion to continue. Any further discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. And somebody has a birthday today. I will not mention the name, but happy birthday to whoever is having that birthday.
Happy birthday.
And we won't sing, we promise. That would be a cruel and unusual punishment. All right, if there's no further business before this board and there are no objections, this meeting stands adjourned.